Kodiak bear slaughters photographer during wedding shoot, July 30th, 2025. The morning of July 30th, 2025 dawned crisp and clear across the Chugach Mountains surrounding Anchorage, Alaska. At 5:47 a.m., the sun crested the eastern peaks, casting long golden shadows across the alpine meadows of Eagle River Valley. The temperature held steady at 42 degrees Fahrenheit, with a light northeastern breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and distant snow. Weather station PAFA recorded visibility at 12 miles, with scattered cumulus clouds drifting lazily across an otherwise brilliant blue sky. It was, by every meteorological measure, a perfect day for an outdoor wedding. Jessica Marie Morris had been awake since 4:15 a.m., her internal clock refusing to acknowledge the early hour as she methodically checked and rechecked her camera equipment in the cramped hotel room at the Anchorage Marriott downtown. At 34 years old, Jessica had built a reputation as one of Alaska's premier wedding photographers, her portfolio filled with breathtaking images captured against the backdrop of the state's unforgiving but magnificent wilderness. Born and raised in Fairbanks, she understood the unique challenges of outdoor photography in Alaska's extreme conditions better than any photographer who had migrated north from the lower 48 states. Her Nikon D850 cameras, 2 backup bodies, and an arsenal of lenses lay arranged with military precision across the hotel room's desk. The 24 to 70 mm f2.8, her workhorse lens for wedding work, gleamed under the fluorescent lighting. Beside it, the 85 mm f1.4 portrait lens and the 16 to 35 mm wide angle waited their turn. Every piece of equipment had been cleaned, tested, and packed in weatherproof cases the night before, but Jessica's pre-shoot ritual demanded one final inspection. She had learned this methodical approach during her 5 years as a photojournalist with the Anchorage Daily News, where equipment failure could mean missing the story of a lifetime. "Weather looks perfect, Jess," came the voice of her assistant, Marcus Timothy Chen, as he emerged from the bathroom, his black hair still damp from the shower. At 26, Marcus had been working with Jessica for 3 years, ever since graduating from the University of Alaska Anchorage with a degree in digital media. His technical expertise with lighting equipment and post-processing software had made him invaluable to Jessica's operation, though his California upbringing sometimes left him unprepared for Alaska's mercurial weather conditions. "Don't jinx it," Jessica replied, securing her telephoto lens in its protective case. "I've seen perfect mornings turn into complete disasters by noon up here." She paused, studying the weather app on her iPhone. "Temperature's supposed to hit 68 degrees by 2 p.m. That's almost too warm for this time of year." The bride and groom, Rebecca Lynn Hartwell and David Michael Peterson, had specifically requested an outdoor ceremony in the Eagle River Valley, despite Jessica's gentle suggestions about more controlled indoor venues. Rebecca, a surgical resident at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, had grown up in Ohio and harbored romantic notions about Alaska's wilderness that her 18 months in Anchorage had not yet tempered. David, a petroleum engineer with BP who had lived in Alaska for 7 years, should have known better, but love had apparently clouded his judgment when it came to his fiancée's wedding dreams. The couple had chosen a meadow located approximately 2.3 miles northeast of the Eagle River Nature Center, accessible via a well-maintained hiking trail that wound through dense spruce and birch forest, before opening onto a natural amphitheater surrounded by towering peaks. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game's wildlife activity reports for the area had been relatively quiet throughout July, with only routine sightings of moose, caribou, and smaller mammals. The most recent bear sighting in the Eagle River Valley had been logged on July 15th, nearly 2 weeks prior, when a young black bear had been spotted approximately 4 miles to the south, well outside the wedding venue area. What the reports failed to capture, however, was the presence of a massive male Kodiak bear that had wandered far from his typical habitat on Kodiak Island. Alaska wildlife biologist Dr. Margaret Elena Vasquez would later determine that the bear, weighing an estimated 1,200 pounds and measuring 9 feet in length, had likely traveled inland following salmon runs during the peak fishing season. Genetic analysis would eventually confirm that this particular bear had been tagged as specimen KOD 4471 during a research project 3 years earlier, when he weighed only 800 pounds and showed typical territorial behavior confined to coastal regions. The anomalous presence of a Kodiak bear so far from traditional habitat should have been detected by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's tracking systems, but budget cuts had reduced the frequency of wildlife surveys throughout the summer of 2025. Dr. Vasquez, who had studied bear behavior patterns for 15 years, would later testify that climate change and shifting food sources had begun forcing bears into unprecedented migration patterns, though such dramatic habitat departures remained extremely rare. At 7:30 a.m., Jessica and Marcus loaded their equipment into Jessica's Ford F-150 pickup truck, the vehicle modified with all-terrain tires and a heavy-duty suspension system designed for Alaska's challenging road conditions. The drive from downtown Anchorage to the Eagle River Nature Center would take approximately 45 minutes under normal conditions, but Jessica had scheduled an extra 30 minutes to account for potential traffic or road conditions. "Did you remember the bear spray?" Marcus asked as he secured the lighting equipment in the truck bed. "2 canisters in the front seat, 1 in the camera bag, and a backup in the gear case," Jessica replied. "Plus the air horn and the emergency satellite beacon." She had learned to take wilderness safety seriously after a close encounter with a protective sow and cubs during a landscape shoot near Denali 2 years earlier. That incident had resulted in no injuries, but the memory of the massive brown bear's aggressive posturing had never fully faded from her mind. As they drove north through Anchorage's increasingly sparse suburbs, the urban landscape gradually gave way to the dense boreal forest that covered much of south-central Alaska. Towering white spruce trees lined the highway, their dark green branches occasionally broken by stands of pale birch or the brilliant yellow-green of summer aspen. The Chugach Mountains rose in the distance, their snow-capped peaks creating a dramatic backdrop that had drawn countless photographers to the region. "So what's the timeline looking like?" Marcus asked, adjusting the GPS device mounted on the dashboard. "Ceremony starts at 2 p.m. sharp," Jessica replied, navigating around a slow-moving RV with Montana plates. "We need to be set up by 1:30 at the latest. Family photos start at 11 a.m., bridal party shots at noon, then we'll have some downtime before the ceremony. After the ceremony, we've got about an hour of golden light for the portrait session." The portrait session. Jessica had scouted the location 3 weeks earlier and identified a stunning overlook approximately 400 yards from the ceremony site, where the wedding party could be photographed against the backdrop of the Chugach Range. The location required a moderate hike through dense forest, but the resulting images would be spectacular. She had even identified specific spots for individual couple portraits, taking advantage of natural lighting conditions and the dramatic landscape features. At 8:23 a.m., they arrived at the Eagle River Nature Center, where the wedding party was scheduled to meet for the hike to the ceremony site. The parking lot held 12 vehicles, including a large white rental van that would transport the bride's elderly relatives to the trailhead. Rebecca's parents, Robert and Linda Hartwell, had flown in from Columbus, Ohio, along with Rebecca's grandmother, 83-year-old Dorothy May Hartwell, who had insisted on attending despite concerns about the challenging terrain. David's family represented a more Alaska-appropriate demographic. His parents, Thomas and Sarah Peterson, were long-time Anchorage residents who ran a successful fishing charter business, and his younger brother, Lieutenant Colonel James Allen Peterson of the Alaska National Guard, served as the best man. James had completed 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, giving him extensive experience with wilderness survival and emergency response protocols that would prove crucial in the hours to come. The wedding party numbered 43 people total, ranging in age from Rebecca's 4-year-old nephew Timothy to Dorothy Hartwell. Most were relatives or friends who had traveled to Alaska specifically for the wedding, with limited experience in wilderness settings. Jessica counted at least 15 guests wearing inappropriate footwear for the terrain, despite the detailed preparation guidelines she had provided 3 weeks earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," called David, gathering the wedding party around the Nature Center's information kiosk, "we need to cover some safety basics before we head out on the trail." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to managing oil rig operations in harsh conditions. "The hike to the ceremony site is about 2.3 miles through dense forest. Stay on the trail, don't wander off for any reason, and if you see any wildlife, do not approach it. Make noise while walking to avoid surprising any animals." James Peterson stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes. "I'll be taking point on the hike, and I've got bear spray and emergency communications equipment. David will bring up the rear to make sure nobody gets separated from the group. If anyone feels uncomfortable or unable to complete the hike, now is the time to speak up." Jessica noticed several guests exchanging nervous glances, but nobody volunteered to remain behind. The excitement of participating in an authentic Alaska wilderness wedding apparently outweighed their safety concerns, a reaction she had observed countless times among tourists who dramatically underestimated the potential dangers of Alaska's backcountry. At 9:15 a.m., the procession began moving up the Eagle River Trail, with James Peterson leading the way and maintaining a steady pace designed to accommodate the least fit members of the group. The trail surface consisted of packed dirt and gravel, with occasional wooden boardwalks crossing marshy areas. Dense spruce and birch forest pressed close on both sides, creating a tunnel-like effect that limited visibility beyond 20 yards in any direction. Jessica and Marcus had positioned themselves in the middle of the group, where they could monitor the wedding party's progress while scouting additional photo opportunities along the trail. The morning light filtering through the forest canopy created dramatic shadows and highlights that would translate beautifully in black and white photography, though Jessica made mental notes to return to these locations after the ceremony for additional shots. "This is incredible," breathed Rebecca's maid of honor, Jennifer Lynn Abbott, a pediatric nurse from Columbus who had never traveled west of the Mississippi River before this trip. "I can't believe people actually live like this." "Like what?" asked David's sister, Michelle Ann Peterson Rodriguez, who worked as a wilderness guide for Denali National Park. At 31, Michelle possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Alaska wildlife and had spent more nights camping in the wilderness than most people spent in hotels. "You know, surrounded by all this," Jennifer gestured vaguely at the towering trees and mountain peaks visible through breaks in the canopy. "It's so wild and dangerous. What if something happens? We're miles from civilization." Michelle exchanged a glance with her brother James, both recognizing the typical outsider's perception of Alaska as some sort of untamed frontier. "The Nature Center has radio contact with emergency services," Michelle explained patiently. "The Alaska State Troopers can have a helicopter here in 20 minutes if needed. Besides, this trail sees hundreds of hikers every week during summer. It's about as safe as wilderness gets." What Michelle could not have known was that approximately 800 yards ahead of the wedding party, concealed in a dense thicket of Devil's Club and alder bushes, the massive Kodiak bear, designated as KOD, 4471 had spent the previous night excavating a shallow daybed near a small creek that crossed under the trail. The bear had been following the creek downstream for 3 days, searching for late-season salmon runs that had failed to materialize due to unusually warm water temperatures throughout the watershed. At 1,200 pounds, KOD 4471 represented the upper size range for Kodiak bears, with a skull measurement that would eventually rank in the top 5% of recorded specimens. His chocolate-brown fur showed the silvered tips characteristic of mature boars, and battle scars across his massive shoulders and neck testified to decades of territorial disputes with other bears. Most significantly, KOD 4471 displayed signs of hyperphagia, the extreme hunger that drives bears to consume massive quantities of food in preparation for winter hibernation. The failure to locate expected salmon runs had left the bear in an increasingly agitated and food-aggressive state. Dr. Vasquez's subsequent analysis of the bear's stomach contents would reveal a diet consisting primarily of vegetation, small mammals, and scattered carrion over the previous week, providing approximately 3,000 calories per day against the bear's metabolic requirement of nearly 20,000 calories daily during peak hyperphagia. This caloric deficit had pushed KOD 4471 into a state of desperation that made him far more likely to view humans as potential food sources rather than threats to be avoided. The first indication of the bear's presence occurred at 10:42 a.m. when James Peterson noticed fresh claw marks on a large spruce tree approximately 50 feet from the trail. The gouges in the bark measured nearly 4 inches in length and were positioned 8 feet above the ground, indicating an animal of considerable size. James called a halt to the procession and examined the marks more closely, his military training having included extensive instruction in tracking and wildlife identification. "David, come take a look at this," James called, his voice carefully controlled to avoid alarming the wedding guests. David made his way forward, followed by Michelle, whose expertise in wildlife signs made her opinion valuable. The 3 siblings studied the claw marks in silence for nearly 2 minutes, each recognizing the implications without wanting to voice their concerns in front of the wedding party. "How fresh?" David asked quietly. "Very," Michelle replied, running her finger along the edge of one gouge. "The sap is still wet. These were made within the last few hours." James nodded grimly. "Size indicates a large brown bear. Probably male, could be marking territory or just sharpening claws, but either way, he's close." The 3 discussed their options in low voices, while the wedding party waited nervously behind them. Turning back would disappoint Rebecca and potentially ruin the wedding she had been planning for 18 months. Continuing forward with a large bear in the immediate area violated every wilderness safety protocol they had learned. The compromise they reached would prove to be a fatal decision. "We continue to the ceremony site, but we stay together as a tight group," James decided. "No wandering off, no individual photos until after the ceremony. If we see any sign of bear activity at the meadow, we abort immediately and head back to the nature center." Jessica overheard the conversation and moved forward to join the discussion. "I've got bear spray and an emergency beacon," she offered. "If you think there's serious danger, we should turn around now." "The marks could be days old," David said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Bears avoid large groups of people. As long as we stay together and make noise, we should be fine." Michelle disagreed, but deferred to her brother's decision, a choice she would regret for the rest of her life. Her wilderness guide training emphasized that any fresh bear sign should result in immediate route changes or trip cancellation. But the social pressure of the wedding situation had clouded her professional judgment. At 11:15 a.m., the wedding party resumed their hike toward the ceremony site, now moving in a more compact formation, with increased chatter designed to alert any wildlife to their presence. The trail began climbing more steeply as it approached the meadow, winding through increasingly dense forest where visibility dropped to less than 15 feet on either side of the path. The ceremony site, when they reached it at 11:47 a.m., exceeded even Jessica's expectations. The natural meadow stretched approximately 200 yards across, surrounded by towering spruce trees and framed by the dramatic peaks of the Chugach Range. Wildflowers carpeted the grass in brilliant displays of purple fireweed, yellow Arctic poppies, and white mountain avens. A small creek meandered along the eastern edge of the meadow, its crystal-clear water reflecting the cloudless sky above. "My God," whispered Rebecca, tears forming in her eyes as she surveyed the scene. "It's absolutely perfect." The wedding party spread out across the meadow, with guests claiming spots for the ceremony, while vendors began setting up their equipment. A small catering company from Anchorage had hiked in earlier that morning to establish a temporary reception area, complete with tables, chairs, and a portable sound system for the ceremony. The logistics of coordinating an outdoor wedding in such a remote location had required months of planning, but the results justified the effort. Jessica immediately began scouting photo opportunities around the meadow's perimeter, identifying optimal lighting conditions and background compositions for the various shots she needed to capture. The afternoon sun would provide perfect backlighting for the ceremony itself, while the forest edge offered intimate settings for individual portraits. Marcus worked with the officiant, Reverend Patricia Lynn Kowalski of Anchorage's First Methodist Church, to set up the wireless microphone system that would ensure the ceremony could be heard throughout the meadow. At 62 years old, Reverend Kowalski had performed dozens of outdoor weddings throughout Alaska, though none in locations quite as remote as Eagle River Valley. "I need to get the bridal party photos before everyone gets too settled," Jessica announced to Rebecca and David. "The lighting is perfect right now, and I want to take advantage of it." The bridal party consisted of Rebecca's 3 bridesmaids, Jennifer Abbott, Rebecca's sister Amanda K. Hartwell Morrison, and David's sister Michelle, along with David's 3 groomsmen, his brother James, his college roommate Christopher Dale Murphy, and his BP colleague Eric Johannes Lindquist. The children in the wedding party included Rebecca's nephew Timothy Morrison and David's 7-year-old niece, Emma Grace Peterson. Jessica positioned the bridal party along the meadow's western edge, with the Chugach Range providing a stunning backdrop. The formal group shots proceeded smoothly, with each combination of family members and friends captured in multiple poses and compositions. Jessica's years of experience allowed her to work efficiently while maintaining the relaxed atmosphere essential for natural-looking photographs. At 12:30 p.m., she moved on to individual couple portraits, starting with Rebecca and David in various locations around the meadow. The bride's flowing white dress created beautiful movement in the mountain breeze, while David's dark suit provided elegant contrast against the wildflower-carpeted ground. These images would become the centerpiece of the wedding album, capturing the joy and intimacy of the moment against Alaska's magnificent wilderness backdrop. "I want to get some shots of just Rebecca by the creek," Jessica told Marcus, indicating the small stream that bordered the eastern edge of the meadow. "The reflection in the water will be gorgeous." Unknown to Jessica or any member of the wedding party, KOD 4471 had been tracking their progress since they left the claw-marked tree nearly 2 hours earlier. The bear had paralleled their route through the dense forest, staying approximately 100 yards from the trail while monitoring their movement and scent. The large group's presence in his territory had initially triggered the bear's defensive instincts, but the persistent food shortage had gradually shifted his response from avoidance to predatory interest. Bears possess extraordinary sensory capabilities that far exceed those of humans. KOD 4471 could detect the wedding party's scent from over a mile away, distinguishing individual humans and even identifying their emotional states through chemical pheromones. His hearing, 7 times more sensitive than human hearing, allowed him to track their conversation and movement patterns with remarkable precision. Most importantly, his vision, though often underestimated by humans, provided excellent detail recognition at distances up to 100 yards. From his concealed position in the forest, approximately 150 yards northeast of the meadow, KOD 4471 had been observing the wedding preparations for nearly an hour. The bear's behavior showed classic signs of predatory assessment, extended periods of motionless watching, systematic evaluation of escape routes, and careful attention to the movement patterns of potential prey. Dr. Vasquez's later analysis would confirm that the bear had selected Jessica as his target well before the actual attack, likely due to her frequent separation from the main group during photography work. At 1:15 p.m., as guests began gathering for the ceremony, Jessica made the decision that would cost her life. She had noticed a particularly scenic overlook approximately 400 yards from the meadow, accessible via a game trail that wound through dense forest before opening onto a rocky ledge with spectacular views of the Chugach Range. The location would provide the perfect setting for intimate portraits of the bride and groom, but reaching it would require a 15-minute hike through forest, where visibility was limited to less than 20 feet. "I want to check out that overlook for some post-ceremony shots," Jessica told Marcus, pointing toward the forest. "It looks like there might be a trail up there." Marcus studied the terrain through binoculars, noting the steep approach and limited visibility. "Shouldn't we wait for the groomsmen to come with us? That's pretty isolated terrain." "It's broad daylight and we won't be gone long," Jessica replied, her artistic vision overriding her safety protocols. "I just want to scout the location and maybe grab a few test shots. We can bring the bride and groom up there after the ceremony." This decision violated multiple wilderness safety principles that Jessica had followed religiously throughout her career. Never venture alone into unfamiliar territory. Always inform others of your planned route and expected return time, and maintain visual or radio contact with your base camp. The excitement of capturing the perfect wedding photos had clouded her judgment at a critical moment. At 1:22 p.m., Jessica began hiking alone toward the overlook, carrying her primary camera body and the 24 to 70 millimeter lens. She had considered bringing Marcus, but decided that his presence would be more valuable at the ceremony site, where he could monitor the lighting equipment and assist with crowd management during the formal ceremony. The game trail Jessica followed showed clear signs of regular wildlife use, with tracks from moose, caribou, and smaller mammals pressed into the soft earth. What she failed to recognize were the fresh bear tracks that overlay the other animal signs, indicating that a large predator had used this same route within the previous few hours. The tracks, measuring over 12 inches in length with clearly visible claw marks, would have been immediately recognizable to anyone with wildlife training. As Jessica climbed steadily through the dense forest, KOD 4471 began moving parallel to her route, staying approximately 50 yards to her left while using the thick vegetation for concealment. The bear's movement through the forest was virtually silent, a remarkable feat for an animal weighing over half a ton. Generations of evolution had perfected the Kodiak bear's ability to approach prey without detection, allowing them to hunt successfully in the competitive ecosystem of Alaska's coastal regions. The terrain Jessica traversed consisted of steep slopes covered with dense undergrowth, fallen logs, and scattered boulders deposited by ancient glacial activity. Devil's Club, a notoriously hazardous plant with thorns capable of inflicting serious wounds, grew in thick patches that forced her to choose her route carefully. The combination of difficult terrain and her focus on reaching the overlook prevented Jessica from maintaining proper situational awareness of her surroundings. At 1:34 p.m., Jessica reached the rocky outcrop she had spotted from the meadow, and the view exceeded even her optimistic expectations. The ledge provided an unobstructed panorama of the Chugach Range, with multiple peaks rising over 7,000 feet above sea level. The afternoon light created dramatic shadows across the mountain faces, while the valley below stretched away toward Anchorage in a tapestry of forest and wetland. "This is absolutely perfect," Jessica said aloud, raising her camera to compose test shots of the scene. The overlook would accommodate small groups for portraits, while providing a spectacular backdrop that would make these images truly unique in her portfolio. She spent approximately 10 minutes testing different compositions and lighting angles, completely absorbed in the technical aspects of the photography. Her camera's meter readings indicated perfect exposure conditions, while the mountain backdrop would require minimal post-processing to achieve the dramatic impact she envisioned. KOD 4471 had positioned himself approximately 30 yards behind Jessica, concealed in a dense thicket of alder bushes that provided perfect camouflage for his dark brown fur. The bear had observed Jessica's photography work with the patient intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Her solitary status, small physical size, and obvious distraction made her an ideal target for an animal driven by extreme hunger and territorial aggression. The attack, when it came at 1:47 p.m., unfolded with the terrifying speed and violence characteristic of large predator encounters. Coyote 4471 exploded from his concealment with a roar that could be heard over a mile away, covering the 30-yard distance to Jessica's position in less than 3 seconds. His massive paws, each equipped with 5-inch claws, struck Jessica from behind with enough force to shatter her spine and ribs before she could react. The impact launched Jessica's body forward off the rocky ledge, her camera flying through the air to shatter against the stone outcrop. She landed hard among the boulders below, her back broken and internal organs severely damaged, but still conscious and aware of the massive predator descending toward her with deliberate intent. "Help me," Jessica managed to whisper, though no human ears were close enough to hear her final words. The bear's weight, over 1,200 pounds, crushed her chest as he seized her in his jaws and began dragging her deeper into the forest, away from any possibility of rescue. The sound of KOD 4471's initial roar reached the wedding ceremony site at 1:47 p.m., interrupting Reverend Kowalski in the middle of the opening prayer. The massive volume and unmistakably aggressive tone of the vocalization caused 43 people to freeze in complete silence, their primitive fear responses overriding the civilized wedding atmosphere in an instant. "What the hell was that?" asked Christopher Murphy, David's college roommate, voicing the question that everyone was thinking, but afraid to ask. James Peterson was already moving toward his backpack, where he had stored emergency equipment, including bear spray, a satellite communicator, and a .44 Magnum revolver that he carried with special permits due to his military status. His combat experience had taught him to distinguish between routine wildlife vocalizations and genuine threats, and the roar they had just heard fell definitively into the latter category. "That was a bear," James announced grimly. "A very large, very angry bear, and it's close." Michelle Peterson Rodriguez was conducting a rapid headcount of the wedding party, her wilderness guide training automatically engaging emergency protocols. "Where's Jessica?" she called out, scanning the meadow for the photographer who should have been documenting the ceremony. Marcus Chen felt his stomach drop as he realized that Jessica had been gone for over 20 minutes, well beyond the brief scouting trip she had planned. "She went to check out an overlook," he said, pointing toward the forest where the roar had originated. She was going to scout locations for post-ceremony photos. The implications hit the wedding party like a physical blow. Their photographer was alone in the forest with a large, aggressive bear, without radio communication or emergency equipment. The probability that she was still alive decreased with each passing second, but the possibility of rescue demanded immediate action. "Everyone stay calm and stay together," James commanded, his military training taking control of the situation. "Michelle, get on the radio to the Nature Center. Tell them we have a probable bear attack in progress and need immediate emergency response. David, help me get everyone moved to the center of the meadow, away from the forest edge." The wedding party's response split along predictable lines. Those with Alaska experience recognized the gravity of the situation and began implementing emergency procedures, while visitors from the lower 48 struggled to process the reality of life-threatening wildlife encounter. Several guests began crying, children started screaming, and the elderly members of the group appeared to be going into shock. "I'm going after her," Marcus announced, grabbing a canister of bear spray from Jessica's equipment bag. "No, you're not," James replied firmly. "You don't have the training or equipment to handle a bear encounter. We wait for search and rescue." "She could be bleeding to death right now," Marcus argued. "Every minute we wait reduces her chances of survival. And if you go charging into the forest unprepared, we'll have 2 victims instead of 1, James countered. "The best thing we can do for Jessica is to get professional help here as quickly as possible." Michelle had established radio contact with the Eagle River Nature Center, where emergency coordinator Alice Marie Thornton immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. At 58 years old, Alice had coordinated dozens of wilderness rescues throughout her career with the Alaska Department of Public Safety, though bear attacks remained relatively rare events that demanded specialized response protocols. "Eagle River Nature Center to all emergency services," Alice broadcast on the emergency frequency. "We have a code red wildlife incident in progress. Adult female missing in Eagle River Valley with confirmed large bear presence. Request immediate deployment of Alaska State Troopers, search and rescue, and MEDEVAC units. GPS coordinates 61.2451 north, 149.1687 west." The emergency response cascade that followed Alice's radio call represented the best of Alaska's wilderness rescue capabilities, but even the most efficient emergency services required time to mobilize and deploy to remote locations. The Alaska State Troopers helicopter unit was based at Anchorage International Airport, requiring 25 minutes minimum flight time to reach Eagle River Valley. Search and rescue teams needed to be summoned from across south-central Alaska, with specialists in wildlife encounters and medical trauma called in from as far away as Fairbanks. At 1:52 p.m., Alaska State Trooper helicopter AST-1 lifted off from Anchorage International Airport, carrying a crew of 4, including pilot Captain Ronald Dale Fisher, co-pilot Lieutenant Sarah Beth Williams, emergency medical technician Miguel Santos Rodriguez, and wildlife specialist Sergeant Patricia Ann Coleman. The helicopter's maximum speed of 150 miles per hour would get them to the scene in approximately 20 minutes, though locating specific individuals in dense forest would require additional time and resources. Meanwhile, approximately 600 yards from the wedding ceremony site, KOD 4471 had dragged Jessica's body to a secluded area near the creek, where he had originally established his daybed. The bear's predatory instincts had been fully engaged, transforming him from a defensive animal avoiding humans into an active predator claiming his kill. Jessica had lost consciousness within minutes of the initial attack, her body's shock response mercifully limiting her awareness of the bear's subsequent actions. Dr. Margaret Vasquez's forensic analysis, conducted 3 days later, would determine that Jessica had survived for approximately 8 minutes after the initial attack, though her injuries were so severe that rescue would have been impossible even with immediate medical intervention. The bear's initial strike had fractured her skull, broken her neck in 2 places, and caused massive internal hemorrhaging that would have proven fatal within minutes. At 2:15 p.m., the first search and rescue team reached the wedding ceremony site, having been dispatched from the Eagle River Fire Department immediately after Alice Thornton's emergency call. The team, led by Captain Timothy James O'Brien, consisted of 6 specially trained volunteers with extensive experience in wilderness medical emergencies and wildlife encounters. Captain O'Brien, a 20-year veteran of Alaska search and rescue operations, immediately assessed the situation and began implementing standard protocols for bear attack scenarios. The wedding party was consolidated into a defensive position in the center of the meadow, with armed personnel establishing a perimeter watch, while medical team members evaluated guests for shock and panic-related injuries. "I need to know exactly where the missing person was headed and when she was last seen," O'Brien told James Peterson, recognizing him as the most qualified member of the wedding party to provide accurate information. Jessica Morris, the photographer, left approximately 55 minutes ago to scout photo locations on that ridge, James replied, pointing toward the overlook where Jessica had been attacked. "She was supposed to be gone 15 minutes maximum. The bear roar came from that same general direction." O'Brien studied the terrain through binoculars, noting the steep approach and limited visibility that would make search operations extremely dangerous. "We can't send search teams into that area until we locate and neutralize the bear threat. If there's been an attack, the bear may be defending the kill site." The harsh reality of wilderness rescue operations was that human safety took priority over individual rescue attempts, even when those attempts might save lives. Sending searchers into an area with an active, aggressive bear would likely result in additional casualties without improving the victim's chances of survival. At 2:23 p.m., Alaska State Trooper helicopter AST-1 arrived over the Eagle River Valley and began systematic aerial reconnaissance of the area where Jessica had disappeared. Pilot Captain Fisher maintained a safe altitude of 500 feet, while the crew used high-powered optics to scan the dense forest below for any sign of the missing photographer or the bear responsible for the attack. "I've got something," announced Wildlife Specialist Sergeant Coleman, focusing her binoculars on a clearing approximately 400 yards northeast of the ceremony site. Large, dark shape moving through the timber, definitely bear-sized. The helicopter moved to investigate, descending to 200 feet for a closer look at the suspected bear. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. KOD 4471 was moving deliberately through the forest, dragging something behind him that appeared to be human remains. "Ground teams, this is AST-1, radioed Captain Fisher. "We have visual confirmation of a large brown bear with what appears to be a human victim. The bear is moving northeast approximately 600 yards from your position. I repeat, confirmed bear with human victim." The radio transmission reached the wedding party through Captain O'Brien's equipment, confirming what everyone had feared, but nobody had wanted to acknowledge. Jessica Morris was dead, killed by the massive predator that was now claiming her body as his property. Rebecca Hartwell collapsed into her fiancé's arms, her wedding dress stained with mud and tears as the reality of the situation overwhelmed her emotional defenses. The outdoor wedding she had dreamed about for 18 months had become a nightmare that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. "We need immediate extraction for all civilians," Captain O'Brien radioed to the helicopter. "This site is not secure with an active bear in the area. How many people can you transport per trip?" "Maximum 6 adults per flight," Fisher replied. We'll need multiple trips to evacuate everyone. Priority goes to elderly and children first. The evacuation process began immediately, with Dorothy Hartwell, Rebecca's 83-year-old grandmother, selected for the first helicopter flight along with the children and their parents. The helicopter landing created a massive downdraft that scattered wildflowers and wedding decorations across the meadow, a surreal contrast to the pastoral scene that had existed just hours earlier. As civilians were evacuated from the ceremony site, additional emergency resources continued arriving in Eagle River Valley. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game deployed a specialized wildlife response team led by Dr. Margaret Vasquez to assess the bear's behavior and determine appropriate intervention strategies. The team included 2 additional wildlife biologists, a veterinarian qualified in large animal tranquilization, and 4 armed rangers with experience in dangerous wildlife encounters. At 3:17 p.m., the Wildlife Response Team established a forward command post at the Eagle River Nature Center, where they could coordinate with search and rescue operations while maintaining safe distance from the active bear. Dr. Vasquez's preliminary assessment, based on helicopter reconnaissance and eyewitness accounts, indicated that KOD 4471 was exhibiting classic predatory behavior rather than defensive aggression, making him extremely dangerous to anyone who entered his territory. "This bear has made a kill and is defending it," Dr. Vasquez explained to the assembled emergency responders. Kodiak bears are notorious for their aggression when protecting food sources. Any approach to the kill site will likely trigger another attack. The tactical options available to the emergency responders were limited and unpalatable. Attempting to retrieve Jessica's body while the bear remained in the area would endanger additional lives without serving any practical purpose. Tranquilizing a bear of KOD 4471 size in dense forest presented enormous logistical challenges and significant safety risks. The most realistic option was to wait for the bear to abandon the kill site naturally, which could take several days. "What about using the helicopter to haze the bear away from the kill site?" suggested Captain Fisher, who had extensive experience with wildlife management operations. "Too dangerous," replied Dr. Vasquez. "A bear that size could easily damage or destroy the helicopter if it felt threatened. Plus, hazing might drive him toward populated areas, creating an even bigger public safety threat." At 4:45 p.m., all 43 members of the wedding party had been successfully evacuated from Eagle River Valley and transported to various medical facilities in Anchorage for evaluation and treatment. Most required only counseling for psychological trauma, though several elderly guests needed medical attention for stress-related conditions. Rebecca and David were taken to Providence, Alaska Medical Center, where Rebecca's colleagues in the surgical residency program provided both medical care and emotional support. The media response to the bear attack began within hours of the initial emergency calls, as news organizations monitored police scanner frequencies and recognized the dramatic story potential of a wedding disrupted by deadly wildlife encounter. By 6 p.m., news crews from Anchorage television stations had established positions outside Providence, Alaska Medical Center, attempting to interview wedding guests and family members about their traumatic experience. Channel 2 News has learned that a wedding photographer was killed by a bear this afternoon during an outdoor ceremony in Eagle River Valley, reported anchor Jennifer Lynn Patterson during the evening news broadcast. The victim has been identified as Jessica Morris, a 34-year-old Anchorage photographer who was well known for her wilderness wedding photography. The story quickly gained national attention as news services picked up the dramatic details of the attack. CNN, Fox News, and other major networks began running segments about the incident, often sensationalizing the circumstances and speculating about the bear's motivations. Social media platforms exploded with comments ranging from sincere condolences to bitter debates about wilderness access and wildlife management policies. Throughout the evening hours of July 30th and into the early morning of July 31st, emergency responders maintained continuous surveillance of KOD 4471's location while planning a recovery operation for Jessica's remains. The bear had established a defensive position near the kill site, showing no signs of abandoning the area or his claim to the body. At 3:22 a.m., on July 31st, Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel made the difficult decision to destroy KOD 4471 using high-powered rifles, recognizing that the bear's predatory behavior toward humans made him an ongoing public safety threat. The operation required 3 marksmen positioned at different angles to ensure clean, humane kill shots that would drop the massive animal instantly without allowing him to flee into dense forest. Wildlife specialist Sergeant Coleman, who had tracked the bear throughout the previous day, delivered the fatal shot using a .375H and H Magnum rifle loaded with 300-grain solid bullets specifically designed for large, dangerous game. KOD 4471 died instantly, his massive body collapsing beside the creek where he had dragged Jessica's remains nearly 14 hours earlier. The recovery of Jessica's body began at first light on July 31st, conducted by Alaska State Trooper investigators and medical examiner personnel. The scene they encountered would haunt even experienced professionals accustomed to violent death. Jessica's camera equipment lay scattered across the overlook where the attack had occurred, while her body showed the devastating effects of prolonged contact with a predatory bear. Dr. Amanda Ruth Castellanos, the state medical examiner who conducted Jessica's autopsy, determined that death had occurred within minutes of the initial attack due to massive trauma to the head, neck, and chest. The bear's initial strike had been so powerful that Jessica's injuries were immediately fatal, though she had likely remained conscious for several minutes afterward. The victim's wounds are consistent with a classic predatory attack by a large brown bear, Dr. Castellanos stated in her official report. Death was caused by multiple traumatic injuries, including skull fracture, cervical spine separation, and massive internal hemorrhaging. The victim would not have survived, even with immediate medical intervention. The autopsy findings provided some comfort to Jessica's family and friends, confirming that she had not suffered prolonged agony before losing consciousness. The speed and violence of KOD 4471's attack had ensured that Jessica's death, while tragic, had not involved extended suffering. Marcus Chen, Jessica's assistant and close friend, struggled to comprehend the loss of someone who had been such a dominant presence in his professional and personal life. Jessica had mentored him through his early career, teaching him not just the technical aspects of photography, but the artistic vision that separated exceptional work from routine documentation. She always said the perfect shot was worth any risk, Marcus told investigators during his formal interview. But she was never reckless. She knew wilderness safety better than almost anyone. I still can't believe she went up there alone. The investigation into the circumstances surrounding Jessica's death would continue for several weeks, examining every decision and action that had contributed to the fatal encounter. Alaska State Trooper investigators interviewed all 43 wedding guests, analyzed wildlife tracking data, and conducted extensive forensic examination of the attack site. Detective Lieutenant Michael Patrick Donnelly, who led the investigation, concluded that Jessica's death resulted from a combination of unusual circumstances that created the perfect conditions for a fatal wildlife encounter. The presence of KOD 4471 so far from his normal habitat, the bear's extreme hunger due to failed salmon runs, and Jessica's decision to venture alone into isolated terrain had combined to produce a tragedy that was both predictable and preventable. Ms. Morris was an experienced wilderness photographer who understood bear safety protocols, Lieutenant Donnelly wrote in his final report. Her decision to leave the wedding party and venture alone into unfamiliar territory violated multiple safety principles that she had followed successfully throughout her career. However, the presence of a large predatory bear in the immediate area was an extraordinary circumstance that could not have been anticipated based on available wildlife activity reports. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game's investigation focused on the systemic failures that had allowed KOD 4471 to establish territory in Eagle River Valley without detection by wildlife monitoring systems. Dr. Margaret Vasquez discovered that budget cuts had reduced aerial wildlife surveys throughout south-central Alaska, creating gaps in the tracking systems designed to monitor dangerous wildlife near popular recreation areas. This bear had been in Eagle River Valley for at least a week before the attack, Dr. Vasquez testified during legislative hearings on wildlife management funding. Our normal survey schedule would have detected his presence and issued appropriate warnings to the public. Unfortunately, budget constraints have forced us to reduce surveillance flights by 40% this year. The broader implications of Jessica's death extended far beyond the immediate tragedy, raising questions about Alaska's ability to balance wilderness access with public safety in an era of shrinking government resources. Environmental groups argued that climate change was forcing wildlife into unprecedented migration patterns that existing monitoring systems could not track effectively. Hunting organizations contended that reduced bear hunting quotas had allowed dangerous predator populations to grow beyond sustainable levels. Rebecca and David's wedding, scheduled to resume after a brief delay to address the emergency, was permanently cancelled as the full impact of the tragedy became clear. The couple eventually married in a private ceremony 6 months later, but the memory of July 30th cast a shadow over their relationship that would require years of counseling to address. Every time I think about that day, I see Jessica's face when she said goodbye before hiking to the Overlook, Rebecca told a trauma counselor during her first session. She was so excited about getting the perfect shot. I feel like my wedding killed her. The psychological impact on wedding guests varied considerably based on their previous experience with traumatic events and their proximity to the emergency response. James Peterson, drawing on his military combat experience, provided crucial leadership during the crisis and suffered relatively minor long-term effects. His grandmother Dorothy, however, never fully recovered from the shock of witnessing such violence, passing away 6 months later from complications that her family attributed to the stress of the bear attack. Christopher Murphy, David's college roommate, developed severe anxiety about wilderness activities and eventually moved from Alaska to his native California, unable to cope with living in a state where such encounters remained possible. Jennifer Abbott, the maid of honor, required extensive therapy to address post-traumatic stress disorder triggered by her first exposure to life-threatening danger. The legal ramifications of Jessica's death proved complex and contentious, with her family filing wrongful death lawsuits against multiple parties, including the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the wedding venue organizers, and the guides who had recommended the ceremony location. The lawsuits argued that inadequate wildlife monitoring and insufficient safety warnings had contributed to Jessica's death. Attorney Robert James Kowalczyk, representing the Morris family, argued that Jessica's death was the predictable result of systemic negligence by state agencies responsible for public safety in wilderness areas. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game knew, or should have known, that budget cuts to wildlife monitoring programs would create dangerous gaps in public safety coverage, Kowalczyk stated in court filings. Jessica Morris died because the state of Alaska prioritized cost savings over human lives. Defense attorneys for the state agencies countered that Jessica's death resulted from her own negligence in violating established wilderness safety protocols. Ms. Morris was an experienced professional who chose to venture alone into isolated terrain without proper safety equipment or communication systems, argued Assistant Attorney General Patricia Ann Sullivan. Her death, while tragic, was the result of personal decisions that no amount of government oversight could have prevented. The legal battles continued for over 2 years, ultimately resulting in a settlement that provided financial compensation to Jessica's family while establishing new requirements for wildlife monitoring in popular recreation areas. The Alaska legislature allocated additional funding for aerial surveys and electronic tracking systems designed to provide real-time warnings about dangerous wildlife activity. Marcus Chen eventually took over Jessica's photography business, renaming it Morris Chen Photography in honor of his mentor and partner. The transition proved emotionally challenging, as nearly every piece of equipment and every client relationship carried memories of Jessica's influence and guidance. I use her cameras, her lighting equipment, even her editing software, Marcus explained to a reporter writing a 1-year anniversary story about the attack. Sometimes I feel like she's still here, guiding my work and helping me capture the perfect shot. Other times, I realize she's really gone and the grief hits me all over again. The wedding industry in Alaska implemented new safety protocols following Jessica's death, requiring wilderness photographers to work in pairs and carry emergency communication equipment during outdoor shoots. The Alaska Professional Photographers Association established the Jessica Morris Memorial Fund, providing grants for wilderness safety training and equipment for photographers working in remote locations. Dr. Margaret Vasquez continued her research into climate-driven changes in wildlife behavior patterns, using KOD 4471's unusual migration as a case study in the unpredictable effects of environmental change on predator behavior. Her work contributed to revised wildlife management policies that emphasized adaptive response systems rather than historical habitat assumptions. Jessica Morris's death was a tragedy, but it also provided crucial data about how climate change is affecting large predator behavior. Dr. Vasquez wrote in a scientific paper published 2 years after the attack. The bear that killed her had traveled over 200 miles from his normal habitat, following food sources that had been disrupted by unusually warm water temperatures. Such migrations were virtually unknown before 2020, but they're becoming increasingly common as environmental conditions continue changing. The Eagle River Valley overlook where Jessica died has been permanently closed to public access, marked with signs warning visitors about the 2025 bear attack. The meadow where the wedding was supposed to take place remains open, but is now patrolled regularly by Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel equipped with bear detection equipment and communication systems. Michelle Peterson Rodriguez, who had questioned the safety of continuing the hike after discovering fresh claw marks, left her job as a wilderness ranger guide and became an advocate for improved wildlife safety education. She speaks regularly at outdoor recreation conferences about the importance of recognizing and responding appropriately to wildlife warning signs. "I knew we should have turned around when we found those claw marks," Michelle told audiences during her safety presentations. "My professional training told me to abort the trip, but social pressure and wishful thinking overrode my judgment. Jessica Morris died because all of us, including me, made decisions based on what we wanted to be true, rather than what the evidence told us." The Alaska State Troopers upgraded their wildlife emergency response capabilities following the investigation into Jessica's death, adding specialized equipment for bear encounters and expanding training programs for personnel who might face similar situations. Helicopter crews now carry tranquilizer equipment and wildlife specialists on routine patrols during peak recreation seasons. Captain Ronald Fisher, who piloted the helicopter during the emergency response, eventually retired from the state troopers but continued working as a flight instructor, specializing in wilderness search and rescue techniques. The memory of arriving too late to save Jessica Morris motivated him to develop faster response protocols that might prevent similar tragedies. In aviation, we analyze every accident to prevent future occurrences, Fisher explained to a new class of rescue pilots. Jessica Morris's death taught us that wildlife emergencies require even faster response times than traditional search and rescue operations. When you're dealing with a predatory bear, every minute counts. The broader impact of Jessica's death resonated throughout Alaska's outdoor recreation community, fundamentally changing how wilderness activities are planned and conducted. Tour companies, wedding planners, and photography services now incorporate wildlife safety briefings and emergency response planning into their standard operating procedures. 5 years after the attack, Eagle River Valley continues to attract thousands of visitors annually, though with enhanced safety measures and increased awareness of wildlife risks. The memorial plaque installed at the Nature Center serves as a permanent reminder of the dangers that exist alongside Alaska's natural beauty. Jessica Morris loved Alaska's wilderness and dedicated her career to sharing its beauty with others, reads the memorial inscription. Her death reminds us that respect for nature must include recognition of its power to humble human ambitions. May her memory inspire others to explore responsibly and return safely. The ripple effects of July 30th, 2025 continue to influence wildlife management policies, outdoor recreation practices, and emergency response protocols throughout Alaska and beyond. Jessica Morris's death, while tragic, contributed to systemic improvements that have likely prevented similar fatalities and enhanced public safety in wilderness areas. Her photography portfolio, preserved and displayed by Marcus Chen, stands as a testament to the artistic vision that drew her to Alaska's remote locations despite their inherent dangers. The images she captured during her career continue to inspire other photographers, while serving as a reminder of both the beauty and the deadly power of America's last frontier. The wedding that never was, the photographs never taken, and the life cut short by a massive predator's desperate hunger created a legacy that extends far beyond the personal tragedy of one woman's death. Jessica Morris became a symbol of the eternal tension between human ambition and natural forces, a reminder that wilderness remains wild despite our best efforts to control and predict it. In the end, KOD 4471's hunger drove him hundreds of miles from his natural habitat, through changing landscapes and disrupted ecosystems, to a fatal encounter with a human being who was simply trying to document love and joy against the backdrop of Alaska's magnificent wilderness. The collision between Jessica's artistic vision and the bear's primal need for survival created a tragedy that continues to resonate through the lives of everyone it touched and through the policies and practices it helped to change. The story of July 30th, 2025 serves as both a memorial to Jessica Morris and a cautionary tale about the unpredictable intersection of human activity and wildlife behavior in an era of rapid environmental change. Her death was simultaneously preventable and inevitable, the result of individual decisions and systemic failures, personal tragedy and broader societal challenges that continue to define Alaska's relationship with its wild heritage. As climate change continues altering migration patterns, food sources, and territorial behaviors of large predators, Jessica's death provides crucial insights into the new realities facing wilderness recreation and wildlife management. The lessons learned from her tragic encounter with KOD 4471 continue shaping policies and practices designed to prevent similar tragedies while preserving access to the wild places that define Alaska's identity. The investigation, response, and aftermath of the Eagle River Valley bear attack created a comprehensive record of how modern emergency services address wildlife emergencies, how communities cope with sudden tragedy, and how individual deaths can catalyze systemic change. Jessica Morris's final photograph was never taken, but her legacy continues influencing how others approach the dangerous beauty of Alaska's wilderness, carrying forward the memory of a talented artist who paid the ultimate price for her passion. The next stories. The Kodiak Ridge Incident. The wind howled across the frozen expanse of the Alaskan wilderness as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her thermal goggles and checked her watch. 11:47 p.m., March 15, 2019. The remote research station at Kodiak Ridge sat like a metallic island in an ocean of snow and ice, its lights cutting through the perpetual darkness of the Arctic winter. What began as a routine wildlife monitoring expedition would become one of the most harrowing bear encounters in recorded history. Dr. Chen had been studying polar bear behavior patterns in this region for over 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for what was about to unfold. The station housed 12 researchers from various universities and government agencies, each an expert in their field, each about to face a terror beyond their worst nightmares. The team had arrived at Kodiak Ridge 3 weeks earlier, settling into the prefabricated buildings that would serve as their home for the next 2 months. The facility consisted of 4 interconnected structures: the main laboratory, living quarters, communications center, and supply depot. A 10-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the compound, designed to keep curious wildlife at bay. Motion sensors and floodlights provided additional security measures that had proven effective for the past 5 years of operation. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the expedition leader, had handpicked each team member for their expertise and ability to work in extreme isolation. At 53, Whitfield was a veteran of dozens of Arctic expeditions, his weathered face telling stories of countless nights spent in the world's most unforgiving environments. His graying beard and intense blue eyes commanded respect from colleagues half his age. Jennifer Martinez, the station's communications specialist, monitored weather patterns and maintained contact with the outside world from her banks of sophisticated equipment. At 29, she was the youngest member of the team, but had earned her place through exceptional technical skills and an unflappable demeanor under pressure. Her dark hair was perpetually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her quick smile could lighten even the darkest Arctic night. Dr. Robert Kim, a marine biologist from the University of Washington, focused on the impact of changing ice patterns on polar bear hunting behaviors. His meticulous research methods and encyclopedic knowledge of Arctic ecosystems made him invaluable to the mission. Kim was 42, of medium height, with wire-rimmed glasses that he constantly cleaned with nervous precision. The team's medic, Dr. Elena Volkov, had served in combat zones before transitioning to wilderness medicine. Her Russian accent still colored her English despite 20 years in America, and her no-nonsense approach to medical care had saved lives in some of the world's most remote locations. At 45, she maintained the physical fitness of someone half her age, knowing that in their isolated environment, medical emergencies could prove fatal without proper preparation. Thomas Bear Johnson earned his nickname not from his massive frame, Though at 6'4" and 280 pounds, he was certainly imposing, but from his uncanny ability to track and predict bear behavior. The former Alaska State Trooper had turned his law enforcement experience into a career as a wildlife specialist, becoming one of the most sought-after experts on dangerous animal encounters. His calm demeanor and quick thinking had prevented numerous potential tragedies over his 15-year career. Dr. Amanda Foster specialized in Arctic climatology, her research focusing on how rapidly changing temperatures affected wildlife migration patterns. The 35-year-old professor from Harvard brought both academic rigor and practical field experience to the team. Her auburn hair and freckled complexion seemed out of place in the harsh Arctic environment, but her determination and expertise earned her the respect of even the most seasoned researchers. James Sullivan served as the team's mechanic and logistics coordinator, responsible for maintaining the generators, vehicles, and complex scientific equipment that kept the station operational. At 48, the former Navy engineer approached every problem with methodical precision, his toolkit and spare parts inventory organized with military efficiency. His steady presence provided reassurance to team members less comfortable with the mechanical aspects of isolated living. Dr. Lisa Park, a behavioral psychologist, studied the effects of extended isolation on both the research team and the wildlife they observed. Her insights into group dynamics and stress management proved invaluable during the long, dark months of Arctic winter. The 31-year-old Korean American had volunteered for the assignment partly to test her own theories about psychological adaptation in extreme environments. Michael Davis, the team's photographer and videographer, documented their research for both scientific publications and public education initiatives. His artistic eye captured not just data, but the stark beauty and inherent danger of their Arctic home. At 27, he was eager to build his reputation in wildlife photography, though he sometimes took risks that made the senior team members nervous. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a veterinarian specializing in large mammals, provided crucial expertise in understanding polar bear physiology and behavior. Her gentle manner with animals contrasted sharply with her fierce determination in defending wildlife conservation efforts. The 40-year-old had dedicated her career to Arctic species preservation, making personal sacrifices that included ending her marriage to spend months in remote locations. Completing the team was Dr. Alan Mitchell, a geologist studying the effects of climate change on Arctic terrain stability. His research into permafrost degradation and coastal erosion provided important context for understanding changing wildlife habitats. The 51-year-old Scotsman brought both scientific expertise and welcome humor to the isolated group, his stories and jokes helping maintain morale during the darkest periods. Each team member had arrived with personal motivations beyond their professional responsibilities. Dr. Chen was driven by childhood memories of her grandmother's stories about polar bears, mythical creatures in Chinese folklore that had sparked a lifelong fascination with Arctic wildlife. For her, this expedition represented the culmination of years of academic preparation and personal dreams. Dr. Whitfield faced pressure from university administrators to produce results that would justify continued funding for Arctic research programs. Budget cuts and shifting political priorities threatened the future of such expeditions, making this mission potentially his last opportunity to conduct large-scale field research. Jennifer Martinez sought to prove herself in a male-dominated field, using her technical skills to overcome skeptics who questioned whether someone of her age and gender could handle the isolation and responsibility of Arctic communications. Her success on this mission would open doors to future expeditions and career advancement. The Kodiak Ridge Station occupied a unique position on the Arctic landscape, situated on a rocky outcropping that rose 30 feet above the surrounding ice plains. The elevation provided excellent visibility for wildlife observation while offering some protection from the worst Arctic storms. However, the exposed position also made the station vulnerable to extreme weather conditions and curious wildlife. The main laboratory building housed sophisticated monitoring equipment worth over $2 million, including thermal imaging cameras, atmospheric sensors, and satellite communication arrays. Computer servers maintained constant contact with research institutions worldwide, transmitting data in real time despite the station's remote location. Backup power systems and redundant communication links provided insurance against the frequent equipment failures common in extreme cold conditions. Living quarters were designed for both privacy and community interaction, with private sleeping chambers arranged around common areas where the team gathered for meals and evening discussions. The building's efficient heating systems struggled against temperatures that regularly dropped below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, creating constant background noise from circulating fans and heating elements. The communications center represented the station's lifeline to civilization, with multiple radio systems, satellite phones, and internet connections providing various means of contact with the outside world. Emergency protocols required daily check-ins with both university administrators and local emergency services, ensuring that any extended silence would trigger rescue operations. Supply storage held enough food, fuel, and equipment to sustain the team for 6 months, with careful rationing extending that timeline if necessary. Medical supplies included surgical equipment and pharmaceuticals, sufficient to handle major injuries or illnesses until evacuation could be arranged. Weapons storage contained both tranquilizer equipment for wildlife management and firearms for emergency protection, though team protocols emphasized non-lethal approaches whenever possible. The compound's security fence had been constructed based on specifications developed through years of trial and error at similar installations. 10 feet of chain link topped with razor wire provided a physical barrier, while motion sensors and automatic floodlights created psychological deterrents for curious animals. Previous installations had experimented with electric fencing, but the extreme cold and frequent power outages made such systems unreliable. During their first week at Kodiak Ridge, the team established daily routines designed to maximize research productivity while maintaining safety protocols. Morning briefings reviewed weather conditions, equipment status, and planned activities for each team member. Evening debriefings allowed researchers to share observations and coordinate future plans while maintaining morale through social interaction. Dr. Chen's polar bear research focused on hunting behavior changes related to shrinking sea ice coverage. Her team used thermal imaging cameras and GPS tracking equipment to monitor bear movements across a 50-square-mile area surrounding the station. Data collected during the first 2 weeks showed concerning changes in traditional hunting patterns, with bears venturing farther inland in search of food sources. Weather conditions during March proved more challenging than anticipated, with temperatures averaging 15 degrees below normal and wind speeds exceeding previous records for the region. The extended cold snap created unusually thick ice formations while simultaneously reducing the seal populations that polar bears depended upon for survival. These conditions created increased pressure on local bear populations, forcing them to explore new territories in search of sustenance. The team's first direct bear encounter occurred on March 8th, when thermal cameras detected a large male polar bear approaching the station's perimeter at approximately 2:30 a.m. Bear Johnson immediately activated security protocols, sealing all exterior doors and illuminating the compound with emergency lighting. The bear circled the fence for nearly an hour, testing various sections for weakness before eventually moving away toward the coast. Dr. Reynolds examined footage of the encounter with growing concern, noting the bear's emaciated condition and desperate behavior patterns. Male polar bears during late winter typically showed signs of hunger stress, but this individual displayed extreme aggression and persistence that suggested severe nutritional deprivation. Her report recommended increased vigilance and stricter security measures for all team members. The incident prompted Dr. Whitfield to review emergency procedures with the entire team, emphasizing the importance of never working alone outside the main buildings. Bear deterrent sprays were distributed to all personnel, along with emergency whistles and GPS beacons that would trigger automatic distress signals if activated. Communication protocols required team members to report their location and status every 2 hours during external activities. Despite the increased precautions, daily research activities continued according to schedule. Dr. Kim's marine biology work required regular sampling of water conditions through holes cut in the sea ice, while Dr. Mitchell's geological surveys necessitated extended periods outside the compound. Each external mission required at least 2 team members and constant radio contact with the communication center. The station's isolation became more pronounced as March progressed, with weather conditions preventing any possibility of aircraft evacuation for extended periods. Supply flights scheduled for mid-month were postponed indefinitely due to severe storm systems moving across the Arctic region. The team's psychological evaluation protocols, administered by Dr. Park, began showing elevated stress levels among several members as the reality of their isolation became undeniable. Jennifer Martinez maintained optimistic spirits through her role as the team's unofficial social coordinator, organizing evening entertainment sessions that included games, movies, and group discussions about topics unrelated to their research. Her efforts helped maintain team cohesion during the most challenging periods, though she privately struggled with homesickness and anxiety about their extended isolation. Dr. Volkov conducted weekly medical examinations of all team members, monitoring for signs of cold-related injuries, vitamin deficiencies, and psychological stress symptoms. Her medical logs documented minor issues including mild depression, sleep disturbances, and increased interpersonal tensions that were typical of extended Arctic isolation. However, overall team health remained within acceptable parameters for their situation. The second significant bear encounter occurred on March 12th, when Davis's external photography session was interrupted by the appearance of a female polar bear with 2 cubs approximately 200 yards from the station. Bear Johnson immediately activated emergency protocols, using the station's PA system to recall all personnel to the main buildings. The bear family remained in the area for over 6 hours, with the mother displaying increasingly aggressive behavior toward the compound. Dr. Chen's analysis of the encounter revealed disturbing patterns in local bear behavior, with multiple individuals showing signs of extreme nutritional stress and territorial desperation. Traditional food sources appeared to be severely depleted, forcing bears to explore previously avoided areas in search of sustenance. The research team found themselves inadvertently positioned in the middle of a developing ecological crisis. Temperature records for March 2019 showed the coldest sustained period in over 40 years, with extended wind chill factors reaching -70 degrees Fahrenheit. These extreme conditions prevented seal populations from accessing traditional breathing holes, disrupting the entire Arctic food chain and creating desperate hunger among predator species. The team's presence at Kodiak Ridge placed them at the intersection of multiple stressed bear territories. Communication logs from mid-March showed increasing concern from university administrators and emergency services regarding the team's extended isolation and growing bear encounters. Weather forecasts predicted continued severe conditions through the end of March, making evacuation impossible even in emergency situations. The team faced the reality that they would need to manage whatever situations arose, using only their own resources. Dr. Whitfield's leadership experience proved invaluable as team stress levels increased throughout the third week of March. His daily briefings emphasized positive aspects of their research progress while acknowledging the legitimate challenges they faced. His calm demeanor and practical problem-solving approach helped maintain team confidence despite their increasingly precarious situation. The station's equipment began showing signs of stress from the extended extreme conditions, with heating systems requiring constant maintenance and communication equipment experiencing intermittent failures. Sullivan's mechanical expertise became crucial as minor problems threatened to cascade into major system failures that could endanger the entire team. His methodical approach to preventive maintenance helped avoid several potentially catastrophic equipment failures. Research data collected through mid-March painted a disturbing picture of Arctic ecosystem disruption extending far beyond their immediate area. Satellite imagery showed unprecedented ice formations blocking traditional wildlife migration routes, while temperature sensors documented conditions that threatened the survival of multiple species. The team's isolation placed them at ground zero of a developing environmental crisis. Bear Johnson's security assessments grew increasingly pessimistic as March progressed, with tracks and other signs indicating growing numbers of desperate bears in the area. Traditional deterrent methods proved less effective against animals driven by extreme hunger, requiring constant vigilance and stricter security protocols. His recommendation for immediate evacuation was overruled by weather conditions that made rescue impossible. The psychological impact of extended isolation began affecting team dynamics during the third week of March, with minor disagreements escalating into more serious conflicts. Dr. Park's intervention protocols helped manage interpersonal tensions, but the stress of their situation continued mounting as weather forecasts showed no improvement in conditions. Team meetings became increasingly focused on survival priorities rather than research objectives. Equipment failures on March 14th temporarily disabled the station's primary heating system, forcing the team to rely on backup generators while Sullivan performed emergency repairs in sub-zero conditions. The 8-hour crisis demonstrated their vulnerability to mechanical problems that could easily become life-threatening in their isolated environment. Successful repairs restored normal operations, but the incident heightened awareness of their precarious situation. Dr. Foster's climatology research revealed that their current weather patterns represented a convergence of multiple atmospheric systems, creating unprecedented conditions across the Arctic region. Her analysis suggested that normal weather patterns might not resume for several additional weeks, extending their isolation indefinitely. The implications of her findings added new urgency to the team's situation assessment. Food inventory conducted on March 15th showed adequate supplies for at least 3 additional months under normal consumption patterns, but increased stress and cold exposure had elevated the team's caloric requirements. Dr. Volkov recommended supplemental nutrition protocols while maintaining rationing measures designed to extend supplies if evacuation continued to be delayed. Morale impacts of reduced meal sizes became another concern requiring management. The third major bear encounter began at approximately 6:30 p.m. on March 15th, when motion sensors detected multiple large animals approaching the compound from 3 different directions. Bear Johnson's immediate security assessment identified at least 4 adult polar bears moving with coordinated behavior that suggested pack hunting tactics rarely observed in the species. Emergency protocols sealed all buildings as the team prepared for an extended siege. Thermal imaging revealed the approaching bears displayed signs of extreme emaciation and desperate aggression that exceeded anything previously documented in Dr. Chen's research. The animals showed no response to traditional deterrent measures, including emergency lighting, noisemakers, and motion-activated devices designed to frighten away curious wildlife. Their behavior suggested a level of desperation that overrode normal fear responses to human presence. The largest bear, estimated at over 800 pounds despite obvious signs of starvation, began systematically testing the compound's perimeter fence for weaknesses. Its methodical approach demonstrated intelligence and problem-solving abilities that alarmed even experienced team members familiar with polar bear behavior. The animal's persistence and apparent planning capabilities suggested a level of desperation that made traditional security measures potentially inadequate. Dr. Reynolds's real-time behavioral analysis identified multiple indicators of extreme stress and hunger-driven aggression in the approaching bears. Their coordination and persistent testing of the compound's defenses represented behavior patterns rarely documented in wild polar bear populations. The veterinarian's growing alarm transmitted to other team members as they realized their situation had escalated beyond normal wildlife encounters. Communication attempts with emergency services proved futile as severe weather conditions blocked all radio frequencies and satellite connections. The team found themselves completely isolated, with no means of requesting immediate assistance while facing their most dangerous wildlife encounter since arriving at Kodiak Ridge. Jennifer Martinez's repeated attempts to establish contact yielded only static and electromagnetic interference from the ongoing storm systems. Team members took positions at observation windows throughout the main building, maintaining visual contact with the bears while staying safely inside the heated structure. Davis documented the encounter with multiple cameras, though the psychological impact of witnessing such desperate animal behavior affected his to maintain professional detachment. His footage would later provide crucial evidence for wildlife behavior researchers studying the incident. The bear's systematic examination of the compound's defenses continued for over 2 hours, with the largest male eventually focusing attention on a section of fence near the generator housing. The animal's repeated testing of fence stability and apparent measurement of barrier height suggested cognitive abilities that exceeded normal expectations for the species. Team members watched with growing anxiety as the bear developed what appeared to be a deliberate plan for breaching their security perimeter. Dr. Whitfield's experience with dangerous wildlife encounters proved invaluable as he coordinated the team's response to the escalating threat. His calm instructions helped maintain order among increasingly anxious team members while establishing contingency plans for various possible scenarios. However, even his extensive experience provided no precedent for the coordinated and persistent behavior displayed by the approaching bears. Emergency medical preparations overseen by Dr. Volkov included setting up surgical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies for trauma treatment scenarios. Her military medical experience had prepared her for combat injuries, but polar bear attack wounds presented unique challenges that required different approaches. The makeshift medical station established in the main building represented their only hope for treating serious injuries, given their isolation from outside medical assistance. Bear deterrent weapons, including tranquilizer equipment and emergency firearms, were distributed among team members qualified in their use, though Bear Johnson emphasized that such measures represented last resort options. The extreme cold conditions affected the reliability of both tranquilizer chemicals and mechanical firing mechanisms, making defensive weapons potentially unreliable when needed most. Non-lethal approaches remained preferred despite the escalating threat level. The psychological impact of the prolonged encounter began affecting team members differently, with some displaying nervous energy while others became withdrawn and anxious. Dr. Park's crisis counseling protocols helped manage immediate stress responses, but the ongoing threat prevented implementation of comprehensive psychological support measures. Team cohesion remained strong despite individual stress reactions to their dangerous situation. At approximately 9:15 p.m., the largest bear successfully identified a weakness in the fence near the power generator housing, where repeated thermal expansion and contraction had loosened several anchor points. The animal's systematic manipulation of the compromised section demonstrated problem-solving abilities that shocked even experienced wildlife researchers. Team members watched in horror as the bear methodically worked to create an opening in their primary security barrier. Emergency protocols activated by Bear Johnson included sealing all building entrances and establishing defensive positions at strategic locations throughout the compound. His military-style approach to the crisis helped organize the team's response despite their growing terror at the prospect of bears breaching their protective perimeter. Weapons were distributed to qualified personnel, while others prepared emergency equipment and medical supplies. The fence breach occurred at 9:47 p.m., when the large male bear successfully created an opening wide enough to permit entry into the compound. The animal's immediate behavior after entering demonstrated continued systematic intelligence as it began examining the buildings for potential entry points. Team members sealed inside the main structure watched through reinforced windows as their worst-case scenario became reality. Dr. Chen's expertise in polar bear behavior provided little comfort as she observed actions that exceeded all previous research on the species' cognitive abilities. The bear's methodical approach to testing building security measures suggested learning and adaptation capabilities rarely documented in wild populations. Her scientific fascination with the unprecedented behavior was overwhelmed by terror at their immediate situation. The bear's examination of building exteriors focused on potential entry points including doors, windows, and ventilation systems. Its systematic approach and apparent understanding of structural weaknesses demonstrated intelligence levels that challenged existing scientific understanding of polar bear cognitive capabilities. Team members realized their situation had moved far beyond typical wildlife encounters into unprecedented territory. Emergency lighting systems automatically activated as the bear moved around the compound, creating dramatic shadows that increased the psychological impact of the encounter. The animal showed no fear response to the bright lights, instead appearing to use them to better examine potential entry routes into the buildings. Traditional deterrent measures proved completely ineffective against an animal driven by extreme desperation. Bear Johnson's tactical assessment identified the main building's reinforced construction as their primary protection, with steel door frames and double-pane windows providing barriers that should resist even determined bear attacks. However, he privately worried about ventilation systems and other potential weak points that might provide entry routes for a sufficiently motivated and intelligent animal. His military experience suggested preparing for siege conditions that could last for extended periods. At 10:23 p.m., the bear began testing the main building's primary entrance, using its massive paws to examine the doorframe and locking mechanisms. The steel construction resisted initial attempts at forced entry, but the animal's persistence and systematic approach suggested it would continue testing until finding a successful method. Team members inside heard the sounds of claws scraping against metal as their final barrier faced its ultimate test. Dr. Volkov's medical preparations intensified as the immediate threat to their safety became undeniable. Her combat medical experience had prepared her for treating severe trauma injuries, but polar bear attack wounds presented unique challenges, requiring different approaches and equipment. The improvised medical station in the main building represented their only hope for treating serious injuries, given their complete isolation from outside medical assistance. The psychological impact of hearing the bears' attempts to breach their final protective barrier affected team members in various ways, with some becoming paralyzed by fear, while others channeled anxiety into productive preparations for various contingencies. Dr. Park's crisis management protocols helped maintain some level of organization despite the terror gripping the isolated team. Group cohesion remained critical as their situation became increasingly desperate. Communication equipment continued failing to establish contact with outside emergency services as severe weather conditions blocked all radio frequencies and satellite connections. Jennifer Martinez's increasingly frantic attempts to reach rescue services yielded only static and electromagnetic interference from ongoing storm systems. The team faced the reality that they would need to survive their current crisis, using only their own resources and preparation. At 10:45 p.m., the Bears' systematic examination of the main building revealed a potential weakness in the emergency exit located at the building's rear section. The animals' focused attention on this alternative entry point demonstrated continued, intelligent problem-solving as it adapted its approach based on the resistance encountered at other locations. Team members realized their sophisticated predator was learning and adjusting its tactics in real time. Emergency barricade construction began immediately as team members used furniture and equipment to reinforce the emergency exit door. Sullivan's engineering experience proved invaluable in designing improvised fortifications using available materials, though he privately doubted their effectiveness against a determined 800-pound predator. His calm competence helped maintain team confidence despite the increasingly desperate nature of their situation. The Bears' behavior throughout the evening demonstrated cognitive abilities that challenged existing scientific understanding of polar bear intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. Dr. Chen's real-time observations provided unprecedented documentation of bear behavior under extreme stress conditions, though scientific fascination was overwhelmed by immediate survival concerns. Her expertise offered little comfort as traditional behavioral predictions proved inadequate for their current situation. Food scent elimination became a critical priority as team members worked to remove any attractants that might be drawing the bears' attention to their building. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary knowledge of animal sensory capabilities emphasized the importance of eliminating even trace odors that could motivate the bears' continued assault on their protective barriers. Emergency protocols required sealing all food in airtight containers, while ventilation systems were temporarily shut down. The bears' persistent testing of building defenses continued past midnight, with the animal displaying stamina and determination that exceeded normal expectations for the species. Its methodical approach suggested intelligence and planning capabilities rarely documented in wild polar bear populations, creating a unique and terrifying situation for the trapped research team. Traditional wildlife encounter protocols provided no guidance for handling such unprecedented animal behavior. Weapon preparation overseen by Bear Johnson included distributing firearms and tranquilizer equipment among team members with appropriate training and experience. However, extreme cold conditions affected the reliability of both chemical agents and mechanical firing mechanisms, making defensive weapons potentially unreliable when needed most. His emphasis on non-lethal approaches remained preferred despite the escalating threat level and growing desperation of their situation. At 12:34 a.m. on March 16th, the bear successfully identified structural weakness in the emergency exit door frame, where repeated thermal expansion and contraction had created microscopic gaps in the building's seal. The animal's systematic exploitation of this vulnerability demonstrated problem-solving abilities that shocked even experienced team members familiar with polar bear behavior. Emergency barricade efforts intensified as their final protective barrier faced its most serious test. Dr. Whitfield's leadership experience became crucial as team panic threatened to overwhelm rational response protocols during the most dangerous phase of their encounter. His calm instructions and practical problem-solving approach helped maintain organization among increasingly terrified team members while establishing contingency plans for various potential scenarios. However, even his extensive wilderness experience provided no precedent for the intelligence and persistence displayed by their sophisticated antagonist. The sound of splintering wood at 1:17 a.m. indicated the bear had achieved partial success in compromising the emergency exit doorframe, creating a gap that allowed the animal to extend its claws into the building interior. Team members heard the terrifying sounds of destruction as their final barrier began failing under the sustained assault of their desperate predator. Emergency medical preparations intensified as the possibility of direct confrontation became increasingly likely. Bear deterrent sprays were prepared for immediate use, despite questions about their effectiveness against an animal driven by extreme desperation and hunger. The chemicals' reduced potency in extreme cold conditions, combined with the bear's apparent immunity to traditional deterrent measures, created significant doubts about non-lethal defensive options. Team members faced the possibility that lethal force might become necessary for their survival. Jennifer Martinez's final communication attempts at 1:30 a.m. succeeded in establishing brief contact with emergency services, though severe static and interference prevented transmission of their exact situation details. Her urgent distress messages indicated their compound had been breached and immediate rescue assistance was required, but weather conditions made any external response impossible. The fragmentary transmission represented their last contact with the outside world before communication systems failed completely. The emergency exit door's catastrophic failure occurred at 1:45 a.m., when the bear's systematic assault finally created an opening large enough to permit entry into the main building. Team members heard the terrifying sounds of metal and wood destruction as their sophisticated predator achieved its goal of breaching their protective barriers. Emergency protocols immediately sealed interior doors as the team retreated to their final defensive positions in the building's central core. Dr. Volkov's medical station became the focus of team defensive preparations as members gathered in the most secure section of the building with emergency medical supplies and defensive weapons. Her trauma treatment protocols were activated in anticipation of serious injuries as the possibility of direct confrontation with their predator became inevitable. The improvised medical facility represented their only hope for treating attack wounds, given their complete isolation from external medical assistance. The bear's entry into the building at 1:52 a.m. marked the beginning of the most terrifying phase of the team's ordeal as they faced direct confrontation with a desperate 800-pound predator inside their previously safe shelter. Emergency lighting cast dramatic shadows as the animal began its systematic exploration of the building interior, testing doors and barriers while following scent trails toward the team's hiding location. Traditional safety protocols provided no guidance for handling such unprecedented circumstances. Team members heard the sounds of the bear's movement through the building as it investigated various rooms and corridors in search of food sources or potential prey. The animal's systematic approach and apparent understanding of building layout demonstrated intelligence levels that challenged existing scientific knowledge of polar bear cognitive capabilities. Their predator's methodical search pattern suggested it was learning and adapting its tactics based on the environment it encountered. Emergency barricade construction using furniture and equipment provided temporary barriers between the team's location and the bear's systematic advance through the building. Sullivan's engineering expertise proved valuable in creating improvised fortifications, though he privately doubted their effectiveness against a determined predator of such size and intelligence. His calm competence helped maintain team confidence despite the increasingly desperate nature of their situation. At 2:15 a.m., the bear's exploration brought it into direct proximity with the team's barricaded position as scent trails and systematic searching led the animal toward their hiding location. Team members heard the terrifying sounds of the predator testing their improvised barriers while following olfactory evidence of human presence. Emergency weapons were prepared for immediate use as direct confrontation became inevitable. Dr. Chen's scientific observations of the bear's behavior provided unprecedented documentation of polar bear intelligence and problem-solving capabilities under extreme stress conditions, though immediate survival concerns overwhelmed research interests. The animal's systematic and methodical approach to overcoming obstacles demonstrated cognitive abilities rarely observed in wild populations. Her expertise offered little comfort as traditional behavioral predictions proved inadequate for their current situation. The first direct visual contact between team members and the bear occurred at 2:28 a.m. when the animal's systematic barrier removal exposed part of their hiding area to direct observation. Team members found themselves face to face with a massive, emaciated predator whose desperate hunger had driven it to unprecedented behavior patterns. The psychological impact of direct confrontation with such a sophisticated and dangerous animal affected even experienced team members. Bear Johnson's tactical experience proved invaluable as he coordinated the team's defensive response to direct confrontation with their predator. His military background provided essential leadership during the most dangerous phase of their encounter, though even his combat experience offered limited preparation for facing an intelligent and desperate wild animal in such close quarters. Non-lethal defensive measures remain preferred despite the escalating threat to team survival. Emergency medical protocols activated by Dr. Volkov included preparation for treating severe trauma injuries as the possibility of bear attack wounds became increasingly likely. Her combat medical experience had prepared her for treating serious injuries under adverse conditions, but polar bear attacks presented unique medical challenges requiring different approaches and equipment. The team's survival might depend on her ability to provide life-saving treatment using only available supplies and improvised facilities. The bear's systematic destruction of their barricaded position continued methodically as the animal worked to reach the team members whose scent it had been following throughout its building exploration. Team members watched in terror as their final protective barriers were systematically dismantled by an intelligent predator whose problem-solving abilities exceeded all previous scientific documentation. Traditional wildlife encounter protocols provided no guidance for handling such unprecedented circumstances. At 2:47 a.m., the bear achieved a significant breakthrough in its assault on the team's defensive position when its systematic barrier removal created a gap large enough for direct access to team members. Emergency defensive measures were immediately implemented as several team members found themselves in immediate danger of attack from the desperate predator. Weapons were discharged in defense of human life as their situation reached its most critical phase. Thomas Johnson's first tranquilizer dart struck the bear in the shoulder region at 2:49 a.m., delivering a dose of chemical restraint agent designed to incapacitate large mammals within several minutes of injection. However, the extreme cold conditions had reduced the chemical's effectiveness, while the bear's desperate condition and adrenaline levels provided additional resistance to the sedative compounds. The animal's continued aggressive behavior demonstrated that pharmaceutical intervention alone would prove insufficient for ensuring team safety. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary expertise proved crucial in assessing the bear's response to chemical restraint agents and predicting the timeline for pharmaceutical effectiveness. Her analysis indicated that multiple doses would be required to achieve complete incapacitation of such a large and stressed animal, while extreme cold conditions further reduced chemical potency. Additional tranquilizer applications were prepared while team members maintained defensive positions against continued predator aggression. The bear's response to tranquilizer injection included increased agitation and aggressive behavior as chemical agents began affecting its nervous system without achieving complete incapacitation. Team members faced the dangerous period when pharmaceutical intervention created unpredictable behavioral responses while failing to eliminate the immediate threat to their safety. Emergency protocols required maintaining maximum defensive readiness while waiting for chemical restraints to achieve full effectiveness. James Sullivan's second tranquilizer dart struck the bear in the rear leg region at 2:53 a.m., delivering additional chemical restraint compounds designed to complement the initial dose and achieve complete incapacitation. However, the animal's continued movement and aggressive posturing demonstrated that even multiple pharmaceutical interventions were proving insufficient against such a large, stressed, and desperate predator. Team members realized that additional defensive measures might become necessary for their survival. At 2:56 a.m., the bear's pharmaceutical-affected behavior became increasingly erratic as chemical agents disrupted its nervous system without achieving complete sedation. The animal's unpredictable movements and continued aggression created additional danger for team members who were unable to predict or prepare for its actions. Emergency medical preparations intensified as the possibility of attack injuries became more likely during this critical transition period. Dr. Chen's behavioral observations documented unprecedented polar bear responses to chemical restraint agents under extreme stress conditions, providing valuable scientific data despite the immediate danger to team safety. The animal's resistance to pharmaceutical intervention exceeded normal expectations for the species, suggesting that extreme nutritional stress and desperate conditions had altered its physiological responses. Her expertise offered limited assistance in predicting the bear's next actions or the timeline for complete incapacitation. The third tranquilizer dart, administered by Bear Johnson at 2:58 a.m., finally achieved the cumulative pharmaceutical effect necessary to begin seriously compromising the bear's motor functions and aggressive capabilities. Team members observed the animal's movements becoming increasingly unsteady as multiple doses of chemical restraint agents began overwhelming its nervous system. However, complete incapacitation remained uncertain given the unprecedented circumstances and the bear's continued resistance to pharmaceutical intervention. Emergency medical attention began immediately as Dr. Volkov assessed team members for injuries sustained during the confrontation, though miraculously, no direct physical contact had occurred between the bear and any human personnel. Her examination protocols focused on identifying shock symptoms, stress-related injuries, and psychological trauma resulting from their terrifying encounter. Medical documentation of the incident would prove crucial for both immediate treatment and long-term psychological support. At 3:12 a.m., the bear finally achieved complete pharmaceutical incapacitation as the cumulative effects of multiple tranquilizer doses overcame its resistance and desperate condition. Team members watched with relief and exhaustion as their predator collapsed into unconsciousness, ending the most terrifying night of their professional careers. Emergency protocols required continued vigilance until the animal could be safely removed from their building and relocated away from the compound. Communication attempts immediately resumed as Jennifer Martinez worked to re-establish contact with emergency services and report the successful resolution of their crisis situation. Her distress messages indicated that the bear had been successfully subdued using non-lethal methods and that no team members had sustained serious injuries during the encounter. However, weather conditions continued preventing any immediate rescue or evacuation operations. Bear Johnson's assessment of the unconscious animal revealed the severe malnutrition and desperate physical condition that had driven its unprecedented aggressive behavior and intelligence-driven assault on their compound. The bear's emaciated state and visible signs of starvation provided clear evidence of the ecological crisis affecting Arctic wildlife populations in their region. His recommendation included immediate veterinary care and relocation to areas with better food availability. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary examination of the sedated bear documented extensive evidence of malnutrition, dehydration, and stress-related health problems that explained its desperate behavior and resistance to traditional deterrent measures. Her assessment indicated the animal required immediate medical intervention and nutritional support to survive its current physical condition. Emergency protocols for wildlife medical care were implemented despite the challenging circumstances and limited veterinary supplies. The bear's medical treatment began immediately with Dr. Reynolds administering intravenous fluids and nutritional supplements designed to address its critical dehydration and malnutrition. Her veterinary expertise proved invaluable in stabilizing the animal's condition while maintaining appropriate sedation levels for both its safety and the team's protection. Medical documentation of the treatment provided important data for understanding the physiological impacts of Arctic ecological disruption. Team members worked together to construct a secure containment area for the unconscious bear using available materials and equipment, ensuring both the animal's safety and their own protection when it eventually regained consciousness. Sullivan's engineering skills proved crucial in designing temporary housing that would contain a large predator while allowing for continued medical monitoring and treatment. The improvised facility represented their best option for managing the situation until external assistance became available. At 4:30 a.m., emergency communication finally succeeded in establishing sustained contact with rescue services, allowing Jennifer Martinez to provide detailed reports of their situation and request immediate assistance for both the team and the injured polar bear. Her comprehensive situation report included medical assessments, security status, and requirements for specialized wildlife evacuation equipment. Weather forecasts indicated that rescue operations might become possible within 48 hours if storm conditions improved as predicted. Dr. Volkov's medical examination of team members revealed no serious physical injuries from their encounter, though psychological stress symptoms required ongoing monitoring and support interventions. Her documentation of stress-related symptoms included elevated heart rates, anxiety responses, and acute shock reactions that were consistent with survival of life-threatening situations. Long-term psychological support would be necessary for all team members following their traumatic experience. The bear's medical condition remained critical throughout the early morning hours as Dr. Reynolds continued administering supportive care using available veterinary supplies and improvised equipment. Her treatment protocols focused on stabilizing the animal's cardiovascular system while addressing severe malnutrition through carefully controlled nutritional supplementation. The bear's survival remained uncertain given its compromised physical condition and the limited medical resources available. Team debriefing sessions conducted by Dr. Park began immediately as psychological support protocols were implemented to help team members process their traumatic encounter. Her crisis counseling experience proved invaluable in helping individuals cope with the psychological impact of surviving a life-threatening predator attack. Group therapy sessions would continue throughout their remaining time at the station to address both immediate trauma responses and long-term psychological adaptation. At 6:15 a.m., the bear began showing signs of regaining consciousness as the tranquilizer drug's effects gradually diminished, requiring careful monitoring and preparation for managing a potentially still dangerous predator. Team members maintained safe distances, while Dr. Reynolds assessed the animal's mental state and physical condition as it transitioned from pharmaceutical unconsciousness back to normal awareness. Emergency sedation remained available if the bear's behavior indicated continued aggression or danger to human safety. Weather conditions showed the first signs of improvement as wind speeds decreased and temperature readings began stabilizing at less extreme levels, offering hope that rescue operations might become feasible within the next 24 to 48 hours. Jennifer Martinez's regular communication with emergency services provided updated weather forecasts and evacuation planning information for both the research team and the injured polar bear. Coordination with wildlife specialists began immediately to prepare for specialized animal transport procedures. The bear's awakening proved surprisingly calm, as malnutrition and medical treatment had significantly reduced its energy levels and aggressive capabilities, though team members maintained maximum caution and defensive preparations. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary assessment indicated that immediate nutritional intervention had stabilized the animal's critical condition while reducing the desperate hunger that had driven its unprecedented attack behavior. Continued medical monitoring remained essential for both the bear's recovery and team safety. Emergency food supplies were carefully prepared for the bear's nutritional rehabilitation under Dr. Reynolds's veterinary supervision, using available protein sources and supplements designed to address its severe malnutrition. Her feeding protocols required gradual nutritional reintroduction to prevent digestive complications while providing essential calories and nutrients for the animal's recovery. The bear's response to treatment would determine both its survival prospects and the timeline for safe relocation efforts. At 8:45 a.m., the bear's condition had stabilized sufficiently to permit careful assessment of its overall health status and prospects for recovery with continued medical intervention. Dr. Reynolds's examination revealed that while the animal remained critically malnourished, immediate veterinary care had prevented further deterioration and begun the process of physical rehabilitation. Her prognosis indicated that with proper nutrition and medical support, the bear could potentially recover from its current crisis condition. Team members began documenting their experience through detailed written reports, photographs, and video recordings that would provide unprecedented scientific documentation of polar bear intelligence and behavior under extreme stress conditions. Davis's photography and videography during the encounter captured crucial evidence of the animal's problem-solving abilities and systematic approach to overcoming security barriers. The documentation would prove invaluable for both scientific research and wildlife management policy development. Communication with wildlife authorities intensified as specialized rescue teams began coordinating equipment and personnel for the complex operation of safely evacuating both the research team and the injured polar bear. Emergency protocols required careful planning to ensure both human safety and appropriate wildlife handling during the evacuation process. Weather forecasts suggested that rescue operations might become feasible within 36 hours if conditions continued improving as predicted. Dr. Chen's preliminary scientific analysis of their encounter identified multiple aspects of polar bear behavior that challenged existing research literature and required immediate attention from the broader scientific community. The animals demonstrated intelligence, problem-solving abilities, and systematic approach to overcoming obstacles, represented unprecedented observations that would influence future wildlife behavior research. Her documentation would contribute to revised understanding of polar bear cognitive capabilities and environmental adaptation strategies. The bear's continued recovery throughout the morning hours provided encouraging evidence that emergency veterinary intervention had successfully prevented the animal's death from malnutrition and exposure. Dr. Reynolds's medical protocols had stabilized its critical condition while beginning the nutritional rehabilitation necessary for long-term survival. However, the animal's future prospects remained dependent on successful evacuation and continued specialized care at appropriate wildlife rehabilitation facilities. At 11:30 a.m., improved weather conditions permitted the first successful helicopter reconnaissance flight over the Kodiak Ridge Station, allowing rescue coordinators to assess the situation and begin planning detailed evacuation procedures. The aircraft's thermal imaging confirmed the presence of both the research team and the bear within the compound, providing visual confirmation of Martinez's communication reports. Specialized wildlife handling equipment and veterinary personnel were immediately mobilized for the complex rescue operation. Team members spent the afternoon preparing for evacuation while continuing to monitor the bear's medical condition and maintain appropriate security measures. Their experience had demonstrated both the dangers of Arctic isolation and the importance of emergency preparedness protocols for handling unprecedented wildlife encounters. Equipment and research data were secured for transport, while personal belongings were packed for immediate departure when rescue operations commenced. Dr. Volkov's continued medical monitoring of team members revealed ongoing stress symptoms and psychological trauma responses that would require extended counseling and support interventions following their evacuation. Her documentation of the incident's psychological impact provided important data for improving emergency response protocols and team preparation procedures for future Arctic expeditions. Mental health support resources were coordinated with the rescue operation to ensure immediate access to appropriate counseling services. The bear's afternoon feeding session under Dr. Reynolds' supervision showed positive responses to nutritional intervention as the animal began consuming prepared food sources and displaying improved energy levels. Her veterinary assessment indicated that emergency medical treatment had successfully stabilized the critical malnutrition that had driven its desperate attack behavior. Continued recovery remained dependent on sustained nutritional support and appropriate rehabilitation environment following evacuation. Emergency coordination between multiple agencies intensified throughout the afternoon as specialized teams prepared equipment and personnel for the complex operation of safely evacuating both human and animal casualties from the remote Arctic station. Wildlife handling specialists, veterinary medical teams, and emergency rescue personnel collaborated on protocols designed to ensure safety for all involved parties during the dangerous evacuation process. Weather monitoring remained critical for determining the optimal timing for rescue operations. At 2:45 p.m., the first rescue helicopter successfully landed at Kodiak Ridge Station, delivering specialized wildlife handling equipment and emergency medical personnel to assist with the complex evacuation operation. The aircraft's arrival marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of the rescue, as teams worked to safely transport both the research team and the injured polar bear from their isolated location. Emergency protocols required careful coordination between multiple specialist teams to prevent additional injuries or complications. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary consultation with specialized wildlife medical teams via radio communication provided detailed assessment of the bear's current condition and requirements for safe transport to rehabilitation facilities. Her treatment documentation indicated that the animal remained stable but required continued medical monitoring and specialized transport equipment designed for large predator species. Coordination with Arctic wildlife rehabilitation centers began immediately to arrange appropriate long-term care facilities. Team members' psychological preparation for evacuation included counseling sessions with Dr. Park, designed to help them cope with the transition from their traumatic isolation back to normal civilization. Her assessment indicated that all team members displayed symptoms consistent with acute stress responses and would require extended psychological support following their rescue. Mental health resources were coordinated with receiving medical facilities to ensure appropriate care continuation. The bear's preparation for evacuation required specialized tranquilization protocols designed to maintain safe sedation levels during transport, while preventing pharmaceutical complications that could endanger the animal's recovery. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary expertise proved crucial in calculating appropriate drug dosages and monitoring equipment for maintaining the bear's medical stability during the dangerous helicopter transport operation. Emergency veterinary protocols remained available if complications arose during the evacuation process. At 4:20 p.m., the bear was successfully loaded into specialized wildlife transport equipment under careful medical supervision as the evacuation operation reached its most critical phase. Team members watched with mixed emotions as their former predator was prepared for transport to rehabilitation facilities where it would receive the specialized care necessary for recovery from its critical malnutrition. The animal's calm response to handling procedures demonstrated how successful emergency medical intervention had been in stabilizing its desperate condition. Team members began boarding evacuation helicopters at 4:35 p.m., ending their month-long isolation at Kodiak Ridge Station under circumstances none of them could have anticipated when the expedition began. Their experience had provided unprecedented scientific documentation of polar bear behavior while testing their survival skills and psychological resilience under extreme conditions. The evacuation marked not just the end of their research mission, but the beginning of a recovery process that would affect them for years to come. Dr. Chen's final observations of the bear during evacuation procedures continued documenting the animal's behavior and responses to human handling, providing additional scientific data about polar bear intelligence and adaptability under controlled conditions. Her research notes from the encounter would contribute significantly to revised understanding of polar bear cognitive capabilities and environmental stress responses. The scientific value of their traumatic experience would benefit Arctic wildlife research for years to come. The helicopter transport operation proceeded successfully despite challenging weather conditions as specialized rescue teams demonstrated their expertise in complex wildlife and human evacuation procedures. Emergency medical monitoring continued throughout the flight as both the bear and team members were continuously assessed for any complications arising from the stress of transport operations. The professional competence of rescue personnel provided reassurance to team members still recovering from their traumatic ordeal. At 6:15 p.m., both helicopters successfully landed at emergency medical facilities in Anchorage, Alaska, where specialized treatment teams were prepared to provide immediate care for both human and animal casualties from the Kodiak Ridge incident. The bear was immediately transferred to Arctic wildlife rehabilitation specialists, while team members underwent comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations designed to address their physical and mental health needs following their traumatic experience. Dr. Volkov's medical handoff to hospital emergency personnel included detailed documentation of team members' physical condition and psychological status throughout their ordeal, providing crucial information for continuing their medical care. Her field medical reports indicated no serious physical injuries among team members, though psychological trauma responses required immediate attention and long-term support interventions. Hospital psychological services were activated to provide appropriate counseling and therapy resources. The bear's transfer to specialized wildlife rehabilitation facilities marked the beginning of its long-term recovery process under the supervision of Arctic animal medical specialists equipped to handle large predator rehabilitation. Dr. Reynolds's veterinary treatment documentation provided crucial information for continuing the animal's medical care and nutritional rehabilitation following its critical malnutrition episode. The bear's survival prospects remained dependent on continued specialized care and successful adaptation to rehabilitation environment. Team debriefing sessions with emergency services personnel began immediately as incident reports were compiled for review by university administrators, wildlife authorities, and emergency response agencies. Their experience at Kodiak Ridge had revealed significant gaps in emergency preparedness protocols for Arctic research expeditions and highlighted the need for improved wildlife encounter procedures. Lessons learned from their ordeal would influence safety protocols for future remote research operations. At 8:30 p.m., preliminary medical evaluations confirmed that all team members had survived their ordeal without serious physical injuries, though psychological trauma assessments indicated that extended counseling and support services would be necessary for complete recovery. Hospital mental health specialists began immediate intervention protocols designed to address acute stress responses while preparing long-term therapy programs for managing post-traumatic stress symptoms. The team's psychological recovery would require months of professional support. Media attention began focusing on the Kodiak Ridge incident as news organizations learned of the unprecedented polar bear encounter and successful rescue operation involving both human and animal casualties. Public interest in the scientific aspects of the encounter competed with sensational coverage of the dramatic rescue operation, requiring careful management to ensure accurate reporting of both the research implications and human interest aspects of the story. Dr. Chen's preliminary media interviews emphasized the scientific significance of their polar bear observations while downplaying sensational aspects of their survival story, focusing public attention on the environmental factors that had driven the animal to such desperate behavior. Her expertise provided crucial context for understanding the ecological crisis affecting Arctic wildlife populations and the broader implications of climate change on predator-prey relationships in polar regions. The bear's initial response to rehabilitation facility treatment showed continued positive progress as specialized wildlife medical teams implemented comprehensive care protocols designed to address its severe malnutrition and stress-related health problems. Veterinary assessments indicated that emergency field treatment had successfully prevented life-threatening complications while beginning the animal's recovery process. Long-term rehabilitation remained dependent on the bear's adaptation to captive care environment and continued medical monitoring. University administrative review of the Kodiak Ridge incident began immediately as officials examined emergency preparedness protocols, equipment adequacy, and decision-making processes that had contributed to both the dangerous situation and its successful resolution. The team's experience highlighted both strengths and weaknesses in current Arctic research safety procedures, while providing valuable lessons for improving future expedition protocols. Institutional liability concerns required careful legal analysis of all aspects of the incident. At 10:45 p.m., team members were finally released to family members and personal support systems as hospital evaluations confirmed their physical stability, and initial psychological assessments indicated no immediate mental health crises requiring extended hospitalization. However, outpatient counseling and therapy services were strongly recommended for all team members to address the long-term psychological impacts of their traumatic survival experience. The transition back to normal life would prove challenging for individuals who had survived such an unprecedented ordeal. Emergency Response Agency analysis of the Kodiak Ridge incident focused on identifying procedural improvements and equipment modifications that could prevent similar situations or improve response capabilities for future Arctic emergencies. The successful non-lethal resolution of the polar bear encounter provided valuable precedents for wildlife management protocols, while highlighting the importance of specialized training and equipment for research teams operating in dangerous environments. Dr. Park's psychological evaluation reports emphasize the importance of continued mental health support for team members as they process their traumatic experience and readjusted to normal social environments following extended isolation. Her professional assessment indicated that while all team members had demonstrated remarkable resilience during their ordeal, the psychological impact of surviving a life-threatening predator encounter would require extended therapeutic intervention for complete recovery. The bear's continued recovery at wildlife rehabilitation facilities provided encouraging evidence of successful emergency intervention and appropriate long-term care protocols for Arctic predator species. Veterinary monitoring indicated steady improvement in the animal's physical condition as nutritional rehabilitation addressed its severe malnutrition, while behavioral assessment suggested successful adaptation to captive care environment. The bear's survival would serve as a positive outcome from an otherwise traumatic incident. 3 days after evacuation, comprehensive incident reports were completed by all team members, providing detailed documentation of their experience for scientific analysis, emergency procedure review, and legal examination. Their accounts revealed the unprecedented nature of polar bear behavior they had observed, while documenting both successful and problematic aspects of their emergency response procedures. The incident reports would influence Arctic research safety protocols for years to come. Dr. Chen's scientific analysis of polar bear behavior observations from the Kodiak Ridge incident was submitted to peer-reviewed journals within a week of evacuation, providing the scientific community with crucial data about predator intelligence and environmental stress responses. Her research would contribute to revised understanding of polar bear cognitive capabilities while highlighting the urgent need for comprehensive Arctic ecosystem protection measures. The scientific value of their traumatic experience would benefit wildlife research and conservation efforts globally. Media coverage of the incident continued for several weeks as public interest in the dramatic rescue story combined with scientific community discussion of the research implications from their polar bear observations. Team members' careful management of media appearances helped maintain focus on environmental and scientific aspects of their experience, while protecting their privacy during the psychological recovery process. The incident became a case study in both Arctic survival and wildlife behavior research. The bear's successful rehabilitation and eventual release back into appropriate Arctic habitat 6 months later provided a positive conclusion to the traumatic events at Kodiak Ridge Station. Wildlife tracking equipment monitored the animal's post-release behavior and confirmed its successful readaptation to wild conditions with improved access to natural food sources. The bear's survival and recovery demonstrated the effectiveness of emergency wildlife intervention protocols when properly implemented. Team members' long-term psychological recovery varied significantly among individuals, with some successfully returning to Arctic research careers, while others chose to focus their professional activities in less isolated environments. Dr. Park's follow-up assessments indicated that while all team members had processed their traumatic experience successfully, the incident had profound impacts on their personal and professional choices. The psychological effects of surviving such an unprecedented encounter would influence their lives permanently. University policy changes implemented following the Kodiak Ridge incident included enhanced emergency preparedness requirements, improved communication equipment specifications, and mandatory psychological screening protocols for researchers assigned to isolated Arctic stations. The team's experience had revealed significant gaps in existing safety procedures while demonstrating the importance of comprehensive emergency planning for extreme environment research operations. Future Arctic expeditions would benefit from lessons learned through their ordeal. Dr. Volkov's medical documentation of the incident provided crucial data for developing improved field medical protocols for Arctic research expeditions, emphasizing the importance of trauma treatment capabilities and psychological support resources for isolated research teams. Her experience treating both human and animal casualties under extreme conditions contributed to enhanced emergency medical training requirements for future Arctic medical specialists. The medical lessons learned would improve survival prospects for future research expeditions. Bear Johnson's security assessment recommendations following the incident led to significant improvements in Arctic research station design and wildlife deterrent systems, incorporating lessons learned about polar bear intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. His tactical expertise had proved invaluable during their crisis, while identifying important weaknesses in traditional security approaches for Arctic wildlife encounters. Future research station security would incorporate his recommendations for handling intelligent and desperate predator species. The Kodiak Ridge incident ultimately became a landmark case study in Arctic research safety, wildlife behavior science, and emergency response coordination, providing valuable lessons that would benefit future research expeditions and wildlife management programs. The team's successful survival of such an unprecedented encounter with a desperate polar bear demonstrated both human resilience and the importance of comprehensive emergency preparedness in extreme environments. Their experience would influence Arctic research protocols and wildlife conservation efforts for generations to come, ensuring that their traumatic ordeal contributed to improved safety and scientific understanding for future researchers working in the world's most challenging and dangerous environments. The next stories. The Last Fisherman of Baffin Bay. The Arctic wind howled across the frozen expanse of Baffin Bay with a violence that seemed personal, as if the very elements had conspired against those foolish enough to venture into its domain. Donald Hughes pulled his parka tighter around his weathered frame and squinted through the swirling snow at the GPS coordinates glowing on his handheld device. 64 years of life had taught him many things, but perhaps most importantly, it had taught him that the Arctic forgave no mistakes. Donald had been coming to these waters for over 3 decades, first as a young commercial fisherman working the processing ships, then later as an independent operator running his own small boat out of Iqaluit. His reputation among the Inuit communities along the coast was legendary. They called him Siku Tongak, which roughly translated to ice spirit, a name earned through countless seasons of reading the ice like others read books. He could tell you within hours when a lead would open, when the wind would shift, when the polar bears would be most active. But on this particular morning in January, as he prepared his gear on what appeared to be a stable ice floe, roughly 3 kilometers from shore, even Donald Hughes's legendary instincts couldn't have prepared him for what was coming. The expedition had begun 6 days earlier when Donald received a call from Marcus Okafor, a marine biologist from the University of Manitoba, who had hired him for what should have been a routine ice fishing survey. Dr. Okafor was documenting the changing fish populations in response to climate change, and Donald's knowledge of the traditional fishing grounds made him invaluable. They had established a base camp on the sea ice, a collection of insulated shelters and equipment positioned on what ice charts indicated was a stable floe that had been locked in place for most of the winter. The ice thickness readings are holding steady at 42 inches. Dr. Okafor had noted that morning, consulting his tablet while Donald prepared the fishing gear. According to the satellite imagery, this floe has been stationary for 11 weeks. We should be good for at least another month. Donald nodded, though something in the quality of the morning light made him uneasy. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts more than instruments, and there was something wrong with the way the snow was drifting, the way the ice creaked beneath their boots. But Dr. Okafor was paying good money, $12,000 for a 2-week survey, and Donald's pension from his commercial fishing days barely covered his expenses back in Iqaluit. The team consisted of 5 people: Dr. Okafor, his research assistant Sarah Chen, a graduate student named Peter Kowalski, their Inuit guide Tommy Kanguk from nearby Pond Inlet, and Donald himself. They had established their main camp in a cluster of specialized Arctic tents designed to withstand extreme weather, with a larger shelter serving as their communal area and laboratory. Solar panels and a small generator provided power for their equipment, while a satellite phone served as their primary communication with the outside world. Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old marine ecology doctoral candidate from Vancouver, had been documenting water temperature and salinity levels through holes they had augured through the ice. Her meticulous notes showed a concerning trend. The water temperature had risen nearly 2 degrees Celsius over the past 4 days, and the salinity levels suggested significant freshwater input from somewhere upstream. "The thermocline is completely disrupted," she had explained to the group the previous evening as they gathered around the portable heater in their main shelter. "Usually at this time of year, we'd see much more stable stratification, but these readings suggest major ice melts somewhere in the system." Peter Kowalski, barely 24, and on his first Arctic expedition, had been tasked with collecting plankton samples and documenting the microscopic life that formed the base of the food chain. His enthusiasm for the work was matched only by his complete inexperience with Arctic conditions. Despite repeated warnings from both Donald and Tommy, Peter had a tendency to wander too far from camp, drawn by the alien beauty of the ice formations and the northern lights that danced across the sky each night. Tommy Kanguk brought 47 years of traditional knowledge to the expedition. Born and raised in Pond Inlet, he had grown up hunting and fishing on the sea ice with his grandfather, learning to read the subtle signs that meant the difference between life and death in the Arctic. Tommy had been expressing concerns about the expedition almost from the beginning, noting changes in the ice conditions that troubled him deeply. "My grandfather always said the ice speaks to those who listen," Tommy had told Donald on their second day. "But this ice is saying things I don't understand." The bears are restless. "Yesterday I found tracks from a large male, maybe 1,000 pounds, circling our camp at a distance of maybe half a kilometer. That's not normal behavior for this time of year. Dr. Okafor, at 51, was leading his 15th Arctic research expedition, a Nigerian immigrant who had fallen in love with Canada's northern wilderness during his doctoral studies at the University of Toronto. Marcus had built his career on understanding how climate change was reshaping Arctic ecosystems. His research had taken him from the Beaufort Sea to Hudson Bay, documenting the dramatic changes occurring in marine food webs as ice patterns shifted and water temperatures rose. The morning of January 19th began like many others, with the team rising before dawn to take advantage of the limited daylight. The temperature had dropped to -37 degrees Celsius overnight, cold enough that their breath crystallized and fell like snow when they exhaled. Donald had been up since 4:30, checking the ice fishing holes they had established at various points around their camp, measuring ice thickness and looking for any signs of structural change. The first indication that something was wrong came at approximately 7:15 a.m., when Donald noticed that one of their fishing holes, located about 50 meters from the main camp, had begun to show signs of pressure ridging around its edges. The ice was being compressed from somewhere, causing it to buckle and crack in a spiderweb pattern that extended outward from the hole like frozen lightning. "Dr. Okafor," Donald called, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air, "you need to see this." Marcus emerged from the main shelter, still pulling on his parka, followed by Sarah and Peter. Tommy was already outside, kneeling beside one of the equipment sleds and examining something in the snow with the focused attention that Donald had learned to respect. "What are you seeing?" Marcus asked, approaching the fishing hole where Donald stood with his ice auger still in hand. "Pressure ridging," Donald replied, pointing to the cracks. "Ice doesn't do this unless it's being pushed by something substantial. Current's not strong enough down here to cause this kind of deformation, and the wind's been steady from the northwest for 3 days." Tommy stood up from where he had been examining the snow, his expression grave. "We have a problem," he announced. "Fresh tracks, maybe 2 hours old. Adult male polar bear, estimated weight over 900 pounds based on paw size and stride length. He's been circling the camp, getting closer each time." Sarah felt her stomach clench with a fear she had never experienced during her previous research expeditions to more temperate waters. "How close?" Tommy pointed to a series of impressions in the snow that led from their camp toward the northeast, where the ice stretched unbroken toward the horizon. "Closest approach was maybe 30 meters from our main shelter. He was here while we were sleeping." Peter, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Shouldn't polar bears be hibernating or something? I thought they didn't hunt during winter." The look that passed between Donald, Tommy, and Dr. Okafor was one of shared knowledge that excluded the younger members of the team. It was Donald who finally answered, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in polar bear country. "Polar bears don't hibernate like other bears," he explained patiently. "The females den during winter to give birth, but males stay active year-round. They hunt seals through breathing holes in the ice, and they can travel hundreds of kilometers looking for food. A bear this far from shore in January is either very hungry or very desperate, and neither option is good for us." Dr. Okafor was already reaching for the satellite phone, his scientific mind racing through protocols and procedures. "We should contact the authorities in Iqaluit, let them know our situation." "Good idea," Donald agreed, "but we need to focus on immediate safety first. Tommy, help me get the bear deterrent set up around the perimeter. Sarah, Peter, start gathering the essential equipment. If we need to evacuate quickly, we want our most important data and samples ready to go." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity as the team implemented their emergency procedures. They had rehearsed bear encounters during their safety briefing before leaving Iqaluit, but the reality of preparing for a potential attack was far more nerve-wracking than any training scenario. Donald and Tommy established a perimeter of noisemakers and flares around the camp, while Dr. Okafor attempted to contact the Canadian Coast Guard on the satellite phone. The connection was intermittent, plagued by atmospheric interference that was common in the Arctic during periods of high solar activity. After 20 minutes of trying, Marcus finally managed to reach the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax, though the connection was filled with static and dropped twice during the conversation. This is Dr. Marcus Okafor, conducting research operations on sea ice in Baffin Bay. He spoke slowly and clearly into the phone. We are approximately 3 kilometers northeast of Pond Inlet. Coordinates 72 degrees, 41 minutes north, 77 degrees, 58 minutes west. We have confirmed polar bear activity in our immediate area and are requesting guidance on evacuation procedures. The voice that came back through the static was professional but concerned. Dr. Okafor, this is Flight Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison at JRCC Halifax. We have your position marked. What is the size of your party and current condition of your personnel? 5 people, all in good health and properly equipped for Arctic conditions. We have shelter, food, and communication equipment. The bear appears to be a large adult male, and our Inuit guide estimates it has made several approaches to our camp overnight. Understood, Dr. Okafor. We're going to coordinate with Canadian Rangers in Pond Inlet and see about getting a helicopter to your position. Weather conditions are marginal, but we should be able to launch within 4 to 6 hours if conditions hold. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. 6 hours seemed manageable, especially with the bear deterrents in place. Thank you, Flight Lieutenant. We'll maintain radio contact and monitor the situation. But as Marcus ended the call and turned to share the news with his team, Donald was already pointing toward the northeastern horizon, where a yellowish shape was moving across the ice with the fluid grace that could only mean one thing. He's back, Donald said quietly, and he's not trying to avoid us anymore. The polar bear was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Even at a distance of several hundred meters, its size was apparent. A massive adult male that probably weighed close to 1,000 pounds, its cream-colored fur thick and pristine against the blue-white of the sea ice. It moved with the confident gait of an apex predator that had never known fear, occasionally stopping to rear up on its hind legs and test the air with its black nose. "Everyone into the main shelter," Tommy ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose ancestors had survived in polar bear country for thousands of years. "Move slowly, no sudden movements. Keep your eyes on him, but don't make direct eye contact." They retreated to their largest tent, a specialized Arctic shelter designed to accommodate the entire team during storms. Through the reinforced window panels, they could watch the bear's approach, which was deliberate but not aggressive. It seemed more curious than threatening, investigating their equipment and following the human scent trails around the camp. Sarah was recording everything with her digital camera, her scientific training overriding her fear as she documented the bear's behavior. "He's showing classic investigative behavior," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "See how he's examining each scent marker, spending extra time at locations where we handled equipment." Peter, meanwhile, was fighting a growing sense of panic that threatened to overwhelm his rational mind. This was his first encounter with a large predator in the wild, and the sheer size and power of the animal was unlike anything he had imagined. What if he decides to attack the shelter? These tent walls won't stop something that big. Donald was methodically checking their emergency supplies while keeping one eye on the bear's movements. "These shelters are designed to withstand polar bear encounters," he said calmly. "The fabric is reinforced with cables, and the frame is engineered to handle significant force. More importantly, polar bears are intelligent predators. They don't waste energy on attacks that seem unlikely to succeed." Dr. Okafor was attempting to maintain contact with the Rescue Coordination Center, but the satellite phone was refusing to connect. The display showed full signal strength, but every attempt to place a call resulted in an immediate disconnection. "Technical difficulties," he muttered, trying not to let his frustration show. "The solar storm activity is playing havoc with satellite communications." Tommy was watching the bear with the focused attention of someone reading a familiar but dangerous text. "He's getting bolder," he observed. "First pass, he stayed maybe 50 meters away. Second pass, 30 meters. Now he's investigating our equipment directly. That's escalation behavior." The bear had indeed moved closer, now examining the equipment sled that contained their scientific instruments and sample containers. Its massive paws, each the size of a dinner plate, left deep impressions in the snow as it circled the sled, occasionally touching items with its nose or batting at them with casual swipes that would have been devastating if directed at a human. "Look at the musculature through the shoulders and neck," Sarah whispered, still recording. "This animal is in peak physical condition. No signs of malnutrition or weakness that might drive desperate behavior. So why is he taking these risks around humans?" It was a question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The answer came 12 minutes later, when the bear's investigation was interrupted by a sound that none of them had been expecting, the high-pitched whine of a snowmobile engine approaching from the direction of Pond Inlet. Through their shelter's windows, they could see a small black dot moving across the ice, trailing a plume of snow behind it. "Must be the Canadian Rangers," Dr. Okafor said with evident relief. "Earlier than expected, but I'm not complaining." But Tommy's expression was troubled. Rangers don't usually travel alone, and they would have radioed ahead to coordinate their approach. Something's not right. The snowmobile was indeed traveling alone, and as it approached their camp, the bear's demeanor changed dramatically. What had been curious investigation became focused alertness, and the massive predator moved with sudden purpose toward a position between the approaching snowmobile and the research team's shelter. "Oh, God," Donald breathed, understanding the situation before the others. The rider doesn't see the bear. The engine noise is masking everything else, and the bear's coat blends perfectly with the ice from that angle. They watched in horror as the tragedy unfolded with the inexorable logic of a natural disaster. The snowmobile was approaching at perhaps 40 kilometers per hour, its rider hunched forward against the wind, focused on reaching the camp that represented safety and warmth. The polar bear, meanwhile, had positioned itself in a slight depression in the ice that rendered it nearly invisible from the snowmobile's approach angle. Sarah was still recording when the collision occurred, her camera capturing every detail of the encounter that would later be analyzed frame by wildlife experts and accident investigators. The snowmobile struck the bear at full speed, launching both machine and rider into the air in the explosion of snow and mechanical debris. The rider, who they could now see was a young Inuit man, probably in his 20s, was thrown clear of the snowmobile and landed hard on the ice roughly 15 meters from the impact point. He lay motionless, his bright orange parka stark against the white surface, while the snowmobile tumbled end over end before coming to rest on its side, its engine still running but making horrible grinding noises. The polar bear, incredibly, had absorbed the impact and rolled with it, demonstrating the incredible durability that allowed these animals to survive in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. It regained its feet within seconds, shook itself once, and then fixed its attention on the motionless human lying on the ice. "We have to help him," Peter said, starting toward the shelter's entrance, but Tommy grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You go out there now. You'll just give the bear 2 victims instead of 1. Tommy said grimly. "That bear has been waiting for an opportunity, and now it has one." What followed was perhaps the most horrifying 60 seconds that any of them would ever witness. The polar bear approached the unconscious snowmobile rider with deliberate caution, testing the air for scents and sounds that might indicate other threats. Finding none, it began the behavior that Sarah's recordings would later help wildlife experts understand as typical polar bear predation, a combination of investigation and feeding that was both efficient and utterly merciless. Donald was already moving, grabbing the flare gun from their emergency supplies and chambering one of their 4 remaining cartridges. "I can't watch this happen," he said, though his hands were shaking as he worked. "Donald!" "No," Dr. Okafor protested. "If you miss, or if the flare doesn't deter him, we'll have lost our best deterrent and possibly provoked an attack on our position." But Donald was already at the shelter entrance, pulling back the reinforced zipper and raising the flare gun toward the scene, playing out 50 meters away. The bear had begun feeding, and the sounds that carried across the ice were ones that would haunt the dreams of everyone present for the remainder of their lives. The flare streaked across the space between shelter and bear like a red comet, striking the ice less than 2 meters from the feeding predator and burning with intense brightness and heat. The effect was immediate. The polar bear reared back from its meal and fixed its attention on this new threat, its black eyes reflecting the flare's crimson light like mirrors. For a moment, the tableau held, bear and humans separated by 50 meters of ice and snow, both parties evaluating their options in the predator-prey calculus that governed life in the Arctic. Then the bear made its decision, abandoning its meal and beginning a purposeful advance toward their shelter. 3 flares left, Donald announced, reloading the gun with hands that were steadier than anyone had a right to expect. "Tommy, get on the radio and try to raise someone. Sarah, Peter, start gathering essential gear. If this shelter doesn't hold, we're going to need to move fast." The polar bear's approach was methodical and terrifying, each step bringing nearly half a ton of muscle and bone closer to their position. At 30 meters, Donald fired the second flare, which struck the ice directly in front of the bear and sent it temporarily retreating to a more cautious distance. But within minutes, it resumed its advance, having apparently decided that the strange red lights were not an immediate threat. Tommy was having no luck with the radio, receiving only static on all emergency frequencies. "Solar storm activity is blocking everything," he reported. "We're completely cut off." At 20 meters, Donald fired the third flare, this time aiming directly at the bear itself. The projectile struck the animal in the shoulder, causing it to rear up on its hind legs with a roar of pain and anger that echoed across the ice like thunder. For a moment, the team thought they had succeeded in driving it off, but instead of retreating, the bear dropped to all fours and charged. "Out the back!" Tommy shouted, but there was no back exit from their shelter, and the reinforced entrance was the only way out. They could hear the bear's breathing now, could smell its wild scent through the shelter's ventilation system, could feel the ice trembling under its weight as it approached. Donald chambered their final flare cartridge and positioned himself at the shelter's entrance, knowing that he would have only one chance to stop nearly half a ton of enraged polar bear. Through the reinforced window, he could see the animal's massive head, its black nose twitching as it tested the air for the scent of prey. The attack, when it came, was faster than anyone could have anticipated. The bear struck the shelter's entrance with the force of a small automobile, its claws tearing through the reinforced fabric like paper, and its massive head pushing through the opening with casual strength that spoke of a lifetime spent breaking through ice and snow to reach seals in their dens. Donald fired the final flare from a distance of less than 3 meters, the projectile striking the bear directly in the face and causing it to rear back with another earth-shaking roar. But the damage was done. Their shelter was compromised, and the bear was now more angry than deterred. "The equipment sled!" Sarah shouted above the chaos. "We can use it for shelter!" They evacuated the destroyed tent in a desperate scramble, grabbing whatever survival gear they could carry, while the bear, temporarily blinded and disoriented by the flare, shook its massive head and pawed at its injured snout. The equipment sled was positioned about 20 meters away, a heavy metal construction that had been designed to carry scientific instruments across rough ice. Tommy reached it first, his lifetime of Arctic experience allowing him to move across the treacherous surface with surprising speed. He was followed by Peter and Sarah, while Dr. Okafor helped Donald, who had twisted his knee during their hasty exit from the shelter. The sled provided minimal cover, but it was better than nothing. Crouched behind its metal frame, they could watch the bear's recovery as it gradually regained its vision and began searching for the source of its injury. The smell of burnt fur and flesh hung in the air where the flare had struck, but the animal's thick coat had protected it from any serious damage. "How long until the helicopter arrives?" Peter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Okafor checked his watch with hands that were shaking from cold and adrenaline. "Original estimate was 4 to 6 hours from when I made contact. That was 3 hours ago, so we could see them any time now." But as if summoned by their conversation, the bear had located their new position and was once again beginning its deliberate approach. Without the flare gun, they had no means of deterring it except for their voices and whatever makeshift weapons they could improvise from their scientific equipment. Tommy was methodically searching through their gear, looking for anything that might serve as a weapon or deterrent. "Ice auger," he announced, pulling out the heavy manual drill they had been using to create fishing holes. "It's not much, but the steel bit might discourage him if it comes to close contact." Donald was checking their remaining supplies with the methodical calm of someone who had faced death before and understood that panic was the enemy of survival. "Emergency beacon is still transmitting," he reported. "Whoever's coming to get us will know exactly where we are. Food for maybe 2 days if we're careful. Water for less than that, but we can melt snow if necessary." The bear was now within 10 meters of their position, close enough that they could see the individual whiskers around its black nose, the small dark eyes that missed nothing, the massive paws that left dinner-plate-sized impressions in the snow with each step. Its approach was unhurried now, as if it understood that its prey was trapped and no longer capable of flight. Sarah was still recording, her scientific training compelling her to document what might be their final moments. "Approaching from the northwest," she whispered into her camera's microphone. "Distance approximately 8 meters. The animal appears calm and confident, showing no signs of the agitation caused by the flare impacts. This is classic stalking behavior." The attack, when it finally came, was preceded by a sound that none of them would ever forget, the distant whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter rotors cutting through the Arctic air. The rescue bird appeared as a black speck on the southern horizon, growing larger with each passing second as it raced toward their position. The bear heard the helicopter too, its acute hearing detecting the mechanical noise long before human ears could distinguish it from the wind. It paused in its approach, raising its massive head to scan the sky for the source of this new disturbance. The helicopter was a Canadian Forces CH-146 Griffon, painted in the distinctive red and white search and rescue colors and carrying a crew of 4 highly trained personnel. As it approached their position, the bear made a decision that probably saved all their lives. It turned and began a rapid retreat toward the northeast, its survival instincts correctly identifying the helicopter as a threat greater than any potential meal was worth. The rescue that followed was conducted with military precision, the helicopter crew deploying to secure the area and evacuate the research team within minutes of landing. The injured snowmobile rider, identified as 23-year-old David Kunu from Pond Inlet, was airlifted directly to Baffin Regional Hospital in Iqaluit, where he would eventually recover from his injuries despite suffering a severe concussion and multiple broken ribs. The investigation that followed would take months to complete, involving wildlife experts, accident reconstruction specialists, and representatives from multiple government agencies. Sarah's video recordings would prove invaluable in understanding the bear's behavior and the sequence of events that led to the encounter. Dr. Okafor's research would eventually be published in the Journal of Arctic Biology, documenting not only the marine ecosystem data they had collected, but also providing crucial insights into polar bear behavior during periods of environmental stress. The bear they had encountered was later identified through DNA analysis of fur samples left at their camp, revealing it to be a 22-year-old male known to researchers as Beaufort 47, who had been tracked by satellite collar for 3 years before the collar had failed the previous autumn. Tommy Kanguk would be recognized by the Canadian government for his role in keeping the research team alive, his traditional knowledge proving as valuable as any modern technology in their survival. He continued to work as a guide for scientific expeditions, though he always insisted on more comprehensive safety protocols for any research conducted in polar bear territory. Donald Hughes returned to his home in Iqaluit with a newfound respect for the dangers he had been casually accepting for decades. The $12,000 he earned from the expedition allowed him to retire comfortably, though he would continue to serve as a consultant for researchers working in Arctic waters. Peter Kowalski completed his graduate studies, but changed his focus from field research to laboratory work, finding that his encounter with Beaufort 47 had left him with a permanent anxiety about large predators that made fieldwork impossible. He would go on to become a respected marine biochemist, studying samples collected by others in conditions far removed from the Arctic ice. Sarah Chen completed her doctoral dissertation on the effects of climate change on Arctic marine ecosystems, with a special focus on how environmental stress affected predator behavior. Her recordings of the polar bear encounter became required viewing in wildlife management courses across North America, and she would eventually become a leading authority on human polar bear interactions. The equipment that had been scattered across the ice during their hasty evacuation was eventually recovered, though much of it had been damaged by the bear's investigation or by exposure to the harsh Arctic conditions. The total value of the lost and damaged equipment exceeded $12,000, an ironic footnote to an expedition that had cost far more in human terms than anyone had anticipated. Climate data collected during the expedition showed that the ice floe they had been camping on was indeed less stable than satellite imagery had suggested, with water temperature readings indicating significant undermining of the ice from below. Within 6 weeks of their evacuation, the entire floe had broken apart during a spring storm, illustrating how quickly conditions could change in the Arctic environment. Beaufort 47 was observed several more times during the remainder of the winter, always in the company of other polar bears and always exhibiting normal behavior. Wildlife experts concluded that his aggressive approach to the human camp had been driven by curiosity rather than hunger, but noted that the distinction was largely irrelevant from a human safety perspective. The Canadian Rangers updated their protocols for responding to polar bear encounters, incorporating lessons learned from the research team's experience. New equipment, including more powerful deterrents and improved communication systems, was distributed to remote communities, while training programs were enhanced to better prepare personnel for encounters with large predators. The story of their encounter would be retold in academic papers, government reports, and eventually in a documentary film that aired on the National Geographic Channel. But for the 5 people who lived through it, the most lasting impact was not academic or professional, but personal, a deep and permanent understanding of their place in the Arctic food web, and a respect for the predators who had ruled these frozen seas for thousands of years before the first human ever set foot on the ice. The Arctic ice continued its ancient dance of freezing and thawing, expansion and contraction, indifferent to the brief human drama that had played out on its surface. Seals continued to maintain their breathing holes, polar bears continued their endless search for food, and the vast frozen wilderness remained as beautiful and dangerous as it had always been. But for 5 researchers and 1 injured snowmobile rider, the events of January 19th would serve as a permanent reminder that in the Arctic, humans were not the apex predators they imagined themselves to be. They were visitors in a realm where survival depended not on intelligence or technology, but on respect for the ancient rules that governed life and death in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. The polar bear, known as Beaufort 47, continues to roam the sea ice of Baffin Bay, following the migration patterns that his species has maintained for millennia. Wildlife cameras occasionally capture images of him hunting seals or traveling across the ice with the tireless endurance that characterizes his kind. He shows no signs of remembering his encounter with humans, for whom the event was traumatic and life-changing, but which for him was simply another day in the endless struggle for survival that defines life in the Arctic. The research continues as it must, with new teams and new equipment and new safety protocols, informed by hard-won experience. The Arctic ice continues to change in response to climate pressures that extend far beyond the polar regions, affecting marine ecosystems and wildlife populations in ways that scientists are still struggling to understand. And somewhere in the vast frozen expanse of Baffin Bay, where the wind never stops and the ice never truly rests, the ancient dance of predator and prey continues as it has for countless generations, indifferent to human presence and ultimately beyond human control or comprehension.